of super old artifacts with some weird symbols on them were found on Easter Island. You know, that tiny island you might have heard of, with the gigantic statues called the Moai. These symbols seem to be some kind of writing, but nobody's been able to figure out what they mean yet. Some scientists even think that if we crack the code, we might finally uncover the secrets behind the downfall of the ancient Easter Island society. So let's put on our detective hats and get to work, shall we? This mysterious script is called the Rongorongo. It was discovered by a Frenchman in the 19th century. He stumbled upon 26 wooden tablets covered in weird hieroglyphs during his trip to the island in 1864. The locals seem to have drawn pictures of animals they had never seen before on the tablets using sharp stones and gave each one a unique name. He thought they were pretty cool and suspected that they might be a remnant of some ancient writing system. Another fun fact about Rongorongo: it's a word that comes from the local language of Easter Island, and it means to recite, to declaim, or to chant out. The wooden tablets on which these glyphs were found might not have been in the best shape when they were discovered. Some were weathered, burned, or damaged. The glyphs were also spotted on a birdman statuette and 2 other ornaments. These words were written in between lines on the tablets. Some of them were even ridged, with the inscriptions falling within channels created by the fluting. The images themselves are shaped like humans, animals, plants, and geometric shapes. Quite a diverse group. And here's something interesting: every symbol with a head is oriented with the head facing up, either forward or to the right. The orientation of the writing is itself weird. According to a local tradition, the tools used to make the carvings were obsidian flakes, or small shark teeth. Deciphering these glyphs has proven to be a bit of a head-scratcher. 3 big barriers make it tricky: the limited number of texts overall, the lack of illustrations and context to help us understand them, and the fact that the language used on the tablets is not well known. Some people even think that these glyphs aren't real writing, but more like fancy symbols that don't have any real language behind them. It was also suggested that they might have been used as a sort of memory aid, or just for decoration. The way they're so carefully carved into the tablets makes it clear that the people who made them wanted to get a message, whatever that is, across. We'll probably never know whether that message was just for funsies or to pass down important stories from one generation to the next. Researchers have been struggling with this ancient script for a while now, but it seems they've made some progress recently. They took a look at the tablets using all sorts of cool techniques like radiocarbon dating and found out that they were made between 1810 and 1870 from local wood. One tablet, in particular, was in pretty rough shape, but the scientists created a 3D model and managed to spot some hidden glyphs that weren't visible before. One researcher said they found some grooves that were probably used for writing, just like drawing lines on a blank piece of paper to make sure your writing is perfectly horizontal. Another super mysterious script that scientists have yet to decipher is called the Indus Valley script. It's made out of a bunch of symbols that were used by the ancient Indus Valley civilization, but specialists are not entirely sure what their purpose was. For starters, the symbols are crazy short, so it's hard to figure out if they represent a full language system. Also, there's no other similar writing to compare it to. Various inscriptions from different periods also show that it hasn't changed much over time. Some folks think it might not even be language related at all, while others think it could be part of the Dravidian family of languages typical of South Asia. Linguists have also been working for centuries trying to figure out the mysterious hieroglyphics left behind by the Maya on monuments, pottery, and bark paper books. As we decode more and more of these ancient symbols, we're gaining a deeper understanding of the Maya civilization's social and historical aspects. For the longest time, many scholars thought that the Maya script wasn't even a language at all. Who can blame them, though? Those glyphs are seriously complex and visually striking. But thanks to the groundbreaking work of a skilled ethnologist in the 1950s, we now know that the script is phonetic. It's a way of spelling words where each letter represents a sound you make when you say it out loud. As more and more linguists started taking an interest in the script in the 70s and 80s, it became clear that it was a fully functioning writing system that could express any spoken sentence with clarity. There's still a lot of decoding left to be done, though, with countless carvings and inscriptions still waiting to be deciphered in jungle ruins and museum closets. There's no telling what other secrets we might uncover about this fascinating civilization. Back in 1908, an Italian archaeologist went on an adventure through the ruins of an ancient palace on the south coast of Crete. Among the dust and ashes in an underground depository, he stumbled upon something pretty cool, a golden-hued disc that was almost intact. This disc has become one of the most famous mysteries in archaeology history. It's called the Phaistos Disc. It's a big clay plate that's covered on both sides with a spiral of weird stamped symbols that circle clockwise towards the center. These symbols are pictograms that show all sorts of things, like a person walking, a tattooed head, a helmet, an arrow, manacles, cats, eagles, and more. But here's the kicker. Nobody has been able to translate the symbols. Since then, many scholars have made attempts to decipher the code, but no luck so far. It's thought that the symbols might be part of Linear A, a script unconnected to any known language. But some experts suggest it could be syllabic writing related to various other languages, like Homeric Greek or Indo-European. Thousands of years ago, there was a mysterious European culture called the Vinca culture. These folks were so cool that they even had their own writing system, which is still one of the earliest known in the world. But there's a catch here too. You guessed it, no one has been able to decipher their script yet. The Vinca culture thrived thousands of years ago, and they were located in today's Eastern European territory. They got their name from the village of Vinca, which was only a small distance downstream from Belgrade on the banks of the Danube River. A team of Bulgarian archaeologists found recently a 7,000-year-old inscription covered in Vinca script. It's the oldest find of its kind in Europe. These symbols were carved into a ceramic tile, and researchers believe they carry information about the local calendar and important events. The Vinca culture was seriously advanced. They even knew how to write on wet clay using a sharp object. It doesn't seem like much these days, but it's a lot to expect from people who lived thousands of years ago. The Voynich manuscript also caused quite a debate between linguists and historians. Is this old book proof of a long-forgotten civilization, or just a clever prank? This manuscript is full of text that even the smartest code breakers haven't been able to figure out. Written way back in the 15th century, it was discovered by a book dealer named Wilfred M. Voynich back in 1912, hence the name. If it's a trick, it's truly convincing. The handwriting is beautiful, and there are even patterns in the text that match up with other languages.
Can you tell me what date it is today? Piece of cake. You just look at your smartphone and voila, you immediately know the day, month, and year. But was it always this easy to tell the date? Did the ancient people even have the concept of a year that lasts 365 days? Yes and no. Mayan calendars had cycles. That's close to what we call a year. But the Mayan cycle was much longer, 819 days. And this is where the mystery begins. 819 days compared to what? When does this calendar begin, and when does it end? Scientists were asking themselves this question for decades. They discovered and deciphered the Mayan calendar during the 1940s. Recently, two American scientists, John Linden and Victoria Bricker, came forward with a solution. So, what did they do differently from their predecessors? The duo deciphered the code by broadening their thinking. They expanded the calendar from 819 days to full 45 years. That's 20 times longer than the original cycle. And a pattern started to emerge. This was a major breakthrough because the Maya told time in a complicated way. You can forget about the easy-to-read Arabic numerals we have today. These ancient people used glyphs. These are tiny images that represent characters, something like the icons on your desktop or universal symbols. When you see a little dot with 3 curved lines above it, you know there is a Wi-Fi network available. The Mayan calendar used glyphs that represented animals or natural phenomena. For example, there were symbols for a jaguar and an eagle. Each glyph marked one day. Each cycle is repeated 4 times, 8 and 19 x 4. Let's call these 4 cycles blocks. The Mayas colored each block differently. Scientists thought these colors corresponded to the 4 cardinal directions. Red was east, white, north. West was black, and finally, yellow marked south. But then the 1980s came. Yeah, this was a weird decade. The calculations were all wrong. Researchers determined that the colors were associated with the position of the sun in the sky. It turned out that the color yellow represented the highest point of the sun, which is called a zenith. White was the lowest point, called the nadir. It seems that the calendar showed just how good the ancient Mayas were at astronomy. This is most evident at Chichen Itza. This principal Mayan city is located on the Yucatan Peninsula, Mexico. There stands an impressive step pyramid. It is dedicated to the feathered serpent deity, and its alignment is perfect. Something marvelous happens here twice a year, during the equinoxes, March and September. These are the times when the sun shines directly over the equator. On these 2 dates, the day and night last the same. At the site of the pyramid, sunlight first illuminates the sculpture of the serpent head at the base of the structure. Then it makes its way up the 91 steps. This creates the illusion that a snake is slithering down the pyramid. Even today, people gather to witness the sight. And it must have been more impressive when the Mayas completed the structure 1050-1300 CE. Do you know what a synodic period is? Neither do I. But Mayan astronomers did. A synodic period is the time that passes before a stellar body does a full lap. For example, this is the period between 2 full moons. When you look from Earth, this period lasts roughly 30 days. And the Mayas were looking at the skies non-stop. They carefully noted the synodic periods of all planets. From Venus to Saturn, these ancient astronomers kept records of nearly all celestial bodies. But what does this have to do with their calendar? The American researchers' calculations revealed the link. Let's take the planet closest to the sun as an example, Mercury. Its synodic period is 117 days. Multiply that by 7 and you get which number? Exactly 8 to 19, when 17 x 7 equals 819. Coincidence? Definitely not. Because synodic periods of other planets also neatly match the magical figure 819. But this is not visible from a single Mayan cycle. Scientists had to expand it several times to discover the pattern. There is a reason why no one could decipher the code for so long. They were focused on a single planet. The trick was to add the Mayan calculation for all the planets. Researchers just needed to see the bigger picture. This brings us to the year 2012. Can you remember that some people thought that the world would end on December 21st? That turned out to be a bust. We are alive and well now. But what started this false rumor? The Mayan calendar, of course. You see, these ancient people based their calendar on long periods of all the planets. That included a lot of complicated math and a lot of multiplying. This 2012 was simply the time when their cycle ended. It is known as the long count. This period is the same as our year. For the Mayas, 2012 was something like the 31st of December for us. Just an end of a cycle in which they measured time, so there was no need to panic. Those New Year's Eve parties might be a bit wild, but the world doesn't end on January 1st. The Mayas stretched more than their calendar. Rubber was the name of the game. Yes, you've heard it correctly. These ancient people were making different grades of rubber 3,000 years before one famous American did, Charles Goodyear. They would extract natural latex from the rubber tree. This is a milky substance that can be turned into rubber. And they weren't the only ones. Scientists found evidence that their neighbors, the Aztecs and the Olmecs, did the same. But what did they do with rubber? They didn't need car tires, definitely. But it's cool to have a nice pair of sandals for the beach. The Spanish wrote about rubber sole footwear that natives wore. Sadly, scientists still haven't found them. That would be a big step for archaeology. So the Maya were playful with rubber, literally. Researchers guessed that they produced balls from latex. These were bouncy and ranged in size from a softball to a soccer ball. A typical Mayan ball game, pits, involved 2 hoops. You must be thinking basketball, but not quite. The hoops were set on walls, 23 feet high. Compare that to the NBA standard of 10 feet. And the hoop was the other way around. There is also a sweet side to the story of the Mayas. These ancient people enjoyed chocolate. In fact, the modern word chocolate probably comes from their language, xocolotl. This meant bitter water. Okay, you get the bitter part, but why water? The Mayas didn't produce chocolate in the form we know it today. They didn't make bars of chocolate, they drank it. Smashed cocoa beans made for excellent drinks. The Mayas perfected the mixture over time and even added spices. Anyone up for a fiery chocolate drink with stew peppers and cornmeal? Who knows, maybe this beverage actually tasted well. Cocoa beans were sacred and used as a currency. Researchers believe all social classes got to enjoy it. Free chocolate for all sounds nice even today. But where did the Mayas get clean water for their cocoa drinks? From the oldest known filtration system in the Western Hemisphere. It was based on zeolite. These are minerals that contain aluminum and silicone compounds. And guess what? Modern air and water purifiers still use this material. Mayan tech wins yet again. Back in Europe, Roger Bacon developed a sand filtration system in 1627, some 1,800 years after the Mayas. But what about regions without rivers, lakes, or springs? Mayan engineers had it all figured out. Rainwater. They would carve out large reservoirs in the limestone bedrock. Then, they would coat these underground caves with a layer of a watertight material. The final step was to make small channels that collected water from the hills above. Scientists estimated that just one of these reservoirs could hold on average 10,000 gallons of rainwater, enough to fill 55 modern hot tubs. Let's dive into the fascinating world of Tamil, a language that's truly one of a kind. From its vibrant history to its user-friendly nature and its wide coverage, Tamil is a linguistic gem that'll leave you in awe. For starters, Tamil holds the title of being the oldest living language on the planet. I mean, it's been around for more than 5,000 years. It's hard to know if it's truly the oldest language ever, but it sure takes the cake for being the oldest living language still in use today. The word Tamil itself isn't just a one-trick pony. It has multiple meanings up its sleeve. Of course, it refers to the language itself, but it also signifies beauty, sweetness, and even the concept of being natural. Talk about a versatile word. How many people still speak this language today, you might wonder? Tamil is like the rock star of languages in India, with over 84 million native speakers. Globally, almost 90 million people proudly call Tamil their mother tongue. Hold on to your hats, because things are about to get divine. In India, you'll find a temple dedicated to none other than Tamul Tai. Now, Tai means mother, and this deity is considered the personification of the Tamil language as a loving and nurturing parent. This language is also not just limited to its homeland. It's a language that has spread its wings across its neighboring areas. For instance, it's also an official language in Singapore and Sri Lanka. Not to mention, it's also recognized as a minority language in South Africa, Malaysia, and Mauritius. Have you ever wondered how it all started? You know, the whole spoken word shenanigan? And where? It's not like words magically popped out of thin air, right? It must have taken quite some time to develop. Linguists don't have an exact date or any clue about what those ancient languages sounded like. But they believe the first spoken language sprouted up around 100,000 years ago. Unfortunately, since written language only came about 5,000 years ago, we don't have much info on what those early languages sounded like. All we know is that they're somehow related to the languages we speak today. Earth is one massive place. We're talking over 7,000 spoken languages among a population of over 7 billion. Sounds like a lot, right? Well, historically speaking, that's not too many. In fact, many languages are gradually fading away, being replaced by their respective countries' official languages. People are hopping on the bandwagon of learning the dominant language for better educational and economic opportunities. Eventually, we might end up with a global language to rule them all. At the moment, the most used language in the world is English. But hey, it wasn't always like this. Back in the day, before the world became one huge linked web, there were oodles of small nations and communities scattered all over the globe. That means there were probably hundreds of thousands of languages evolving just like living organisms. But let's travel back in time for a bit, shall we? Picture a bunch of early humans roaming the land in their little tribes and communities. Within these groups, language became the bee's knees, the go-to for communication. It was crucial for their hunter-gatherer lifestyle. This language thingamajig allowed them to hunt like pros, multiply their numbers, build cool stuff, and survive in all sorts of gnarly conditions, even at high altitudes. Plus, it gave them a leg up on their rivals, like the Neanderthals. Sure, those folks may have been smarter and stronger, but it's widely believed they didn't gather together as Homo sapiens did. And so, about 40,000 years ago, poof, bye-bye Neanderthals. It just goes to show that language is quite a handy-dandy tool. Or at least that's one of the theories. Fast forward a bit, and humans had conquered all the major land masses. Mesopotamia, for instance, was the hotspot for this linguistic revolution, and by around 3200 BCE, Sumerian, a totally groovy language, stole the show. To this day, it's one of the oldest ones we know of, if not the oldest. What's interesting is that Sumerian had no linguistic siblings. It was like the loner kid on the linguistic playground. Let's look into the Sumerians' writing skills for a bit too. It's nothing like what we're used to today. Scientists have named it cuneiform writing, and it emerged as a means to record trade and political information. As a matter of fact, the first recorded name in history wasn't of a king or some powerful figure. It was most likely the name of an accountant, but it's difficult to know for sure. Cuneiform consisted of a collection of pictograms that represented objects or people, much like the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. Sumerian culture thrived in several city-states located in the southern region of Mesopotamia. Uruk, known as the first true city, was among the stars of the show. However, these cities eventually faced some unwelcome visitors. As a result, by 2000 BCE, Sumerian had taken a back seat, becoming a classical language just like Latin. Now here's a little twist in the tale. Sumerian might not actually hold the title of the oldest known language. Egyptian, for instance, emerged around the same time as the Sumerian civilization, but along the banks of the Nile. This ancient language also made use of pictograms in its writing system, but it did undergo some serious transformations due to its interactions with neighboring languages like ancient Greek, Persian, and Latin. By the time of Roman occupation, Egyptian had become a dead language, gradually replaced by Greek. Now let's give a special shout out to another one of those old languages that are still spoken today, Hebrew. This remarkable language has been around for over 3,000 years and has managed to remain relatively unchanged throughout its long history. Hebrew is one of the official languages in Israel, and around 63% of the population in this country speaks it. Also, there are approximately 6.1 million people all over the world who can proudly say that Hebrew is their first language. We can't finish up this list without mentioning the amazing Latin language. It all started in this place called Latium in the old Roman Empire, and that's how it got its name. Back in the day, Latin was the fancy language for all well-educated folks. But here's a fun twist. The Latin of yesteryear was a bit different from what we can check out in ancient books today. The alphabet they used was a total rebel, and they even wrote from right to left. Talk about turning the writing world upside down. But over time they realized it was more fun to go from left to right. Latin literature? Oh boy, it's considered the creme de la creme of ancient writing. You know, the kind that scholars and bookworms go crazy for. If there were an Oscar for ancient literature, Latin would be cleaning up all the awards. Latin was also like this ancient influencer. It's been around for so long that it has influenced a bunch of modern languages. Many English words are either straight up taken from Latin or have been heavily influenced by it. More so, Latin has even spawned a family of languages called Romance languages. No, not about love stories, chocolates, and flowers. Romance languages are the offspring of Latin, thanks to the not-so-gentle nudge of the Roman Empire. We're talking about languages like French, Spanish, Romanian, Portuguese, and Italian. But here's a bummer. Latin is considered a long-gone language. It's frozen in time, like a linguistic time capsule. While living languages like English keep changing and growing, Latin is stuck in the past. It had its transformation and alteration phase when it was still spoken, but now it's just enjoying retirement in the linguistic retirement home. Regardless, Latin still sneaks into our daily lives without us even realizing it. You know when someone asks you the time and you say it's 4 p.m., well, guess what? You're speaking Latin. PM stands for post-meridium, which basically means after midday. And AM? That's ante-meridium, meaning before midday.
You know, a lot happened in the first millennium CE. Sure, we're talking about 1,000 years worth of human history. If you'll remember from school, you'll know it was the time of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. It was when humans saw the transition to the intense times of the Middle Ages. And some say it was the apex period of the Mayan civilization, all the way in Mesoamerica. But thanks to top-notch technological advancements, we can look at history a lot differently today. You see, archaeologists have found actual proof that the Mayan civilization may have started way before we think it did, and that since the beginning, their civilization was far from simple. To find out more about this, you'll have to tread deep into the Guatemalan rainforests. Are you down for the ride? Rainforests are dense and difficult to access. If you were an archaeologist, I'm betting you'd find them quite threatening as well. That's actually one of the reasons why we've been kept in the dark for so long when it comes to the truth about the Mayans. But take a look at this. You'd expect to see ruins like this in places like Portugal, England, or the United States. I'm talking about 130-foot wide roads, painted white to help travelers journey through the nighttime. For scale, these roads were about half the size of an American football field. Huge, huh? Scientists recently unearthed a 110-mile network of roads such as these, and they think this dates back to before the first registered Mayan ruins we've known so far. These roadways, which sometimes ran over swampy ground and were even elevated at times, are being called the world's first superhighways. Even if there is no registry of animal-powered vehicles, it's believed that the Maya used them to travel around a network of possibly 964 settlements. They were built like a huge spider web, and from what archaeologists have gathered, they worked as an implied system of economic and social interactions. This completely debunks the traditional idea that the Mayan pre-classic period, which dates back to 1000 to 350 BCE, was made of small tribal settlements. Imagine the manpower and engineering ability you need to muster to build something close to these white highways. Scientists believe that these causeways were built pretty much the same way as the Mayans built their pyramids. Oh, and if you're wondering about these gigantic pieces of architecture, don't worry, we'll talk about them in a bit. Now, so far, scientists believe that the roads were built with a mixture of mud and quarry stone. Oh, and using several layers of limestone, of course. Researchers were only able to find all of this out because of a new technology called LiDAR imaging. Do you know how we've used sonar technology to map out the ocean bed? Well, this is very similar to that. But instead of using sounds, we use laser systems. This mapping system allows researchers to see through and beyond the thick canopies of forests. It's like we have X-ray vision. This is definitely a game changer. But lost Mayan cities began to be unearthed in the mid-20th century. And since then, ruins from cities such as Tikal, Palenque, and Uxmal have been rediscovered. But let's take a few steps back for a moment to get some context. The Mayans were one of the biggest pre-Columbian civilizations living in the Americas. Until now, experts believe that, at its apex, the Mayan civilization consisted of over 40 cities with a population of millions of people. That's a lot of folks. Their civilization spanned Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala, and Belize, and they survived mainly on agriculture. The thing is, the Yucatan Peninsula was an extremely difficult place to grow crops. So the Maya had to develop a complex irrigation system in most of their cities. They built a series of ceremonial buildings, pyramids, plazas, and even courts for playing ball. The Mayans might have been keen pyramid builders, but they also developed an advanced astronomical system. With whatever ancient technology they had, they were able to predict the exact location of planets, such as Venus and Mars, as well as the exact dates of eclipses. Now, let's take a look at some of their sites. This is Tikal. Located at the heart of the Guatemalan jungle, Tikal is believed to have been the capital of the ancient Mayan Empire. At its height, it was comparable in importance to such cities as London or New York in today's world. It is composed of a series of complex monuments. In total, the site has 12,000 buildings. The North Acropolis is Tikal's most ancient complex of monuments. Built solely by human hands around 350 BCE, it served as the resting place of kings and chiefs. Its monuments are up to 200 feet high. Back in the day, the step pyramid temples were painted a beautiful red. Mayans loved that color. Today, of course, you'll only see the limestone. We've said that the Mayans spread out through different countries, so it shouldn't come as a surprise that Chichen Itza is a 10-hour drive from Tikal today. There's no feud between the two, they were just different city centers, like New York and LA. It's got one of the best preserved pyramids on Earth to date. Located in Mexico's Yucatan state, this Mayan city is well over 1,500 years old. At its peak, it was home to 35,000 people. The site covers 4 square miles of land. The highlight is El Castillo, a tremendous step-like temple standing 80 feet above ground. Its most peculiar feature is that it has 91 steps up each of its 4 sides, including the upper platform, which makes for 365 steps, the same number of days as the solar year. Makes you go, Behold, the lost city of Palenque. Another important Maya city is believed to have hosted over 6,000 people at its peak. Archaeologists have made some unusual discoveries on this site. The most eccentric of them all makes us think of Indiana Jones and the Tomb Raider. One of the buildings in Palenque is believed to be the final resting place of the Red Queen of Palenque. She was believed to be the grandmother of the last Mayan king. In her honor, a huge monument was built to keep her body after her passing. The discovery of the tomb itself was already thrilling. Archaeologists found an ancient monument when digging at the site back in 1994. The first they saw was a room with a hidden door. Once they opened the door, they discovered an 8-foot-long corridor. At the end of this corridor was the queen's chamber, and inside was the mummy of the queen herself. They found her to be accompanied by her pearls, jade shells, and expensive rocks. But as the team explored the remains, they saw something strange. The room was filled with a red-colored powder. Researchers knew that the color red was important to the Mayan people, but they didn't understand why the queen was buried with this unknown substance. They took a sample back with them for further analysis and discovered that the red powder was cinnabar, a very dangerous mineral. This powder, when inhaled, can cause severe health damage to a person. The team concluded that this could only be a trap for anyone trying to steal her riches. Talk about curses, huh? One thing that has always troubled researchers is the lack of evidence on the decline of this almighty empire. What could have been the cause of their demise? Was it a drought? Some disease? New research in 2017 did shed some light on this issue. Using data from a site called Ciabal, located southwest of Tikal, scientists analyzed radiocarbon data from ceramics and archaeological excavations to extract new information about the unexpected passing of this great civilization. The information shows that instead of a sudden collapse, the Mayans most likely fell in waves of social instability and political crises. These events are believed to have deteriorated Mayan city centers and began causing the dispersion of the Mayan population. So, what's your take on the end of this story?
And we love the thrill and fun we get from the games like Monopoly and Taboo. But what did people play hundreds of years ago? Surprisingly, some of these games are still played today, and you can buy their replicas. Let me know which is your favorite at the end of the video. Let's start with one of the oldest board games in the world, the Royal Game of Ur. Also called the Game of 20 Squares, was invented around 4,600 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia. The game was rediscovered when the excavations started in the 1920s in the Royal Cemetery of Ur in modern-day Iraq. The game wasn't only played by royals. People from all social classes enjoyed this 2-player strategy race game. It was popular all over the Middle East, but its fame reached other places like Sri Lanka. Okay, Brightside, tell me how this game is played. It's similar to backgammon. People competed to get all their pieces from one part of the board to the other. To win this board game, you need to have a strategy, but also you needed luck. Besides entertainment, this game had a special importance regarding fortune-telling. The events in the game were believed to mirror the player's future. According to this belief, the game transferred messages from deities or supernatural beings through the moves in the central squares. How come people stopped playing this game? Well, the game evolved with time, and then it was replaced with other board games. Senet is a board game from ancient Egypt dating to around 3100 BCE. The objective of the game is to take all of your pieces off the board. You get 4 or 5 colored pieces. Then you use Senet sticks as dice. Players take turns. There are special rules on how and when you can move your pieces. For example, if you throw the sticks and get 1 face-up stick, you can move 1 space, but also get an extra turn. Archaeologists discovered Senet boxes in the ancient Egyptians' tombs. The Egyptians believed in an afterlife, and the word Senet means passing. That's why the game was also associated with the journey to the other side. So it was more than a game, sort of a symbol for the struggle to reach eternity. The game was played and admired by Tutankhamun and Queen Nefertari. It's no secret that the ancient Egyptians loved parties. If you'd been invited to a feast held by a person from the upper class, you would have seen musicians, jugglers, and wrestlers waiting to entertain you. You would have probably spotted some people playing Senet too. On the original board, you would have seen squares decorated with hieroglyphs representing additional rules of the game. Some models in our modern-day replicas also have such hieroglyphs. So far, we've looked at 2-player games. Now, let's look at a fun 4-player game. Mahjong originated in the Qing dynasty in China. But the world record for the longest game, which was set in 2012 when the game was played for 33 hours, doesn't belong to the Chinese. But the biggest Mahjong party did happen in China. 2,380 people were playing the game at the same time. In this game, the player's goal is to form melds with tiles to get points. The highest scored player will be the winner. The winner should form a mahjong. The tiles are traditionally decorated with Chinese characters, bamboo branches, and dots. There are more special tiles that have symbols like dragons and flowers on them, and they serve different purposes. The game resembles rummy, a card game. Mahjong became popular in Western countries in the 19th century, and now you can find different versions of the game all around the world and online. Moving on to India. Krita Patram is an ancient card game. Handmade round cards are made out of cloth pieces. The cards are decorated with depictions of Ramayana and Mahabharata, which are India's greatest epics. So much so that they influenced the way of thinking and the belief system in the region. The game was played in the royal courts, but later it's believed to have been played by people from other social classes too. Before the game starts, a player assembles the cards into a deck and shuffles them to randomize the order. Let's return to ancient Egypt, but this time we'll have a look at a game that can be played by up to 6 people. Mehen got its name from a serpentine deity. It was played roughly between 3100 BCE and 2300 BCE. It's a board game in the shape of a coiled snake. The snake's body is divided into small rectangular zones. And yes, it's a snake game, but not similar to the one on old Nokia phones. Egyptologists say that this game is kind of a mystery because the rules and scoring system of Mehen is unknown. What they do know is that the game was played with sphere-shaped tokens. The players started the game from the tail and headed towards the head of the serpent, which was in the middle. The players had to race to get to the center. Additional lion-shaped gaming pieces added a little spice to the competition. The players had to strategically maneuver their pawns to special formations called blockades. There were some opportunities along the way for players to speed up the process through slides and jumps. This game had something in common with Senet, the other Egyptian game we've spoken about. Here too, the players had sticks to throw on the table, but instead of 2 colors, they had flat and round sides. Ludus Latroncalorum, aka Latrones, is a 2-player board game from the Roman Empire. The aim of the game is to test the military prowess of the players. It's played on grids. The precise rules of the game remain a mystery, though many scholars have worked on several reconstructions of Latrones. Among multiple interpretations of the rules, one explanation is widely accepted. It suggests that players moved pieces in all directions, aiming to surround and isolate the opponent's pieces with their own. Captured tokens were then moved away from the board. This game resembles chess or droughts in terms of the rules, but this one is more about military tactics. Luckily, the famous Roman poet Ovid mentioned this game in his poems, and we learned some of the rules thanks to his poems. I guess Ovid was a fan of game nights. I'd love to see what a game night looked like back then. Another strategy game from the Roman Empire is Nine Men's Morris. This long-forgotten board game was rediscovered in 2018 during excavations. It originated in 1400 BCE. In this game, rivals control their armies that consist of 9 men. Each piece represents different qualities on the grid-like playing field. If your opponent cannot form a mill or lose all their pieces but 2, then you become the winner. In Norway, France, Germany, and many other countries, especially in medieval Europe, there were different variations of Nine Men's Morris. Interestingly, Shakespeare mentioned it in his famous comedy, A Midsummer Night's Dream. The next game is Wari. It's also known as Mancala. It became popular in West Africa and then spread to the rest of the world. Here, 2 players want to beat each other by planning their moves. This game requires mental skills and lots of practice. In other words, wearing your lucky t-shirt won't help you win the game. Each player has 6 holes filled with seeds and a bank to collect the seeds. As a player, you want to get the seeds of your opponent. There are detailed rules for how you can collect the seeds, of course. You can play this game at home. Instead of seeds, you can use any small objects, like pebbles, marbles, or even M&Ms. Do you think these games will still be around 1,000 years from now? Chess, for instance, has made it this far, and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere.
Let's talk about calendars, a super important tool in human civilization. Imagine if we didn't have calendars. Chaos, right? We wouldn't know when to celebrate birthdays, be able to plan holidays, or even show up for important events. Calendars bring order to our busy lives and help us make sense of time. But here's the cool part. Humans have been using them for thousands of years. Ancient civilizations created their own unique calendars based on their needs and cultural beliefs. Some ancient calendars followed the cycles of the moon, while others focused on the movements of the sun. Some even combined the two. Talk about celestial fusion. Today, we use the modern Gregorian calendar as our primary system. But did you know that alongside this trusty timekeeper, there's a whole bunch of other ancient calendars still kicking around? Yup, they're like old friends that we can't let go of. They help us celebrate cultural festivals, plan religious observances, and connect with our roots. So let's visit some famous ones. Buckle up. First stop, the Mayan calendar. These ancient Mesoamericans were serious about time. Their calendar was a combo of lunar and solar cycles, like a cosmic mashup. It had different cycles within cycles, making it mind-bendingly intricate. It's like solving a space puzzle. Of course, we can't forget the ancient Egyptians with their awe-inspiring calendar. They used a solar-based system and were keen on aligning it with the flooding of the Nile River. Talk about staying in sync with nature's rhythms. And finally, the Aztec calendar, a work of art in itself. It was a mesmerizing mix of solar, lunar, and ritual cycles. Its intricate stone carving, the sunstone, is like a cosmic masterpiece that captures the essence of time. These ancient calendars weren't just about marking days and months. They were packed with cultural significance, religious rituals, and historical events. They're like little time capsules that connect us to our ancestors and help preserve their wisdom and traditions. But the most interesting thing is that we use some of these calendars even today. For example, the Chinese calendar. This one has been around for centuries, guiding Chinese festivities and traditions. You see, instead of following just the sun like our regular calendars, the Chinese calendar pays close attention to the moon's dance in the sky. Each month begins with a new moon and has its own special vibe, and the year has 12 lunar months. But here's the twist. The lunar months don't always match up perfectly with our regular year. So every now and then, the Chinese calendar adds an extra month to stay in sync with the seasons. It's like a surprise encore. Now, let's meet the zodiac animals, the real stars of the show. Each year in the Chinese calendar is assigned a zodiac animal, and it's like assembling a fabulous animal posse. There are 12 zodiac animals, like a wild and wonderful crew. You've got the clever rat, the brave tiger, the graceful dragon, and more. So if you're born in a certain year, you're said to have the traits of that zodiac animal. Imagine having a monkey or a tiger as your time mascot. But how does the calendar decide which animal gets the spotlight each year? Well, legend has it that there was a grand race among the animals. The clever rat hitched a ride on the ox's back and won the race by jumping off at the finish line. And that's why the rat gets to kickstart the zodiac cycle. So let's go over this cycle. Do you know the year of which animal you were born? Simply Google it and let's take a look at the animals. See if you have any of these traits. Once the smart rat has had its moment in the spotlight, the mighty ox charges in next. The ox is known for its hard work and determination, like the dependable and strong-willed friend who always has your back. After the ox, the fearless tiger pounces onto the scene. With its majestic stripes and fierce gaze, the tiger brings a burst of excitement and adventure. It's a daring feline friend ready to explore the world with you. Following the tiger's roar, the crafty rabbit hops into view. Picture a fluffy and adorable bunny, always ready to bring sweetness and harmony. The rabbit adds a touch of gentleness and creativity to the zodiac parade, like a gentle breeze on a spring day. Next up, the bold and fiery dragon. This legendary creature takes the stage with its majestic presence and mythical powers. It's like a friend with a mystical vibe, who's just filling the air with magic and awe. After the dragons, the wise and intuitive snake slithers into the play. This serpentine friend brings wisdom and insight, like a guide navigating the twists and turns of life. It's always great to have a sneaky and clever confidant on your side. Next one is the lively and playful horse. Imagine the wind in your hair while you're riding a horse in a clear field. A horse person may have an adventurous spirit, always ready for a thrilling journey. Then, the graceful and elegant sheep. With its gentle nature and nurturing spirit, the sheep brings peace and harmony to the zodiac. It's a caring friend to lean on in times of need. Following the sheep, the mischievous monkey swings into action. This lively and clever prankster adds a dose of fun and laughter to the party. It's a playful buddy who can turn any dull moment into a wild adventure. After the monkey, the proud and confident rooster struts its stuff. It's a magnificent bird. The rooster brings confidence and assertiveness to the zodiac crew, like a natural-born leader. Next, it's time for the loyal and diligent dog to wag its tail. This faithful friend brings loyalty, honesty, and a whole lot of love to the zodiac family. Dogs are known to be trusty companions who always stay by your side. And finally, we have the wise and gentle pig, with its cute snout and contented oinks. The pig embodies generosity, kindness, and abundance. It's a buddy who knows how to appreciate the good things in life and brings joy wherever it goes. And there you have it, the zodiac animal parade in all its glory. The Chinese calendar also has a yin-yang twist. It pairs each zodiac animal with one of 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, or water. This brings even more personality to the mix. It's like adding a spice to your zodiac animal cocktail. The Chinese calendar still guides festivities like the vibrant Chinese New Year. It also helps people decide the luckiest times for important life events. Need to plan a wedding? Check the calendar. Want to start a business? Yep, the calendar's got your back. It's like a fortune teller guiding you through the twists and turns of life. So, next time you see the Chinese calendar, remember that it's a celebration of lunar magic, animal wonders, and cultural traditions. Now, we dive into the Hindu calendar. This one is all about embracing cycles and cosmic rhythms. Instead of just following the regular months, the Hindu calendar aligns with the movements of the sun and the moon. It's like a non-stop party with the cosmos. The Hindu calendar is also still grooving today, and it's packed with colorful festivals and celebrations. From Diwali, the festival of lights, to Holi, the festival of colors. It's a fireworks extravaganza combined with a vibrant paintball fight. The Hindu calendar is also used for religious observances and auspicious timings. It helps determine the best time for weddings, housewarming ceremonies, and other important life events. The Hindu calendar doesn't just stick to the usual 365 days. It accounts for lunar months, solar months, and even leap years. So next time you glance at a calendar, remember that it's not just a bunch of dates and numbers. It's a remarkable tool that connects us to our past and guides us into the future. Ancient calendars remind us of our shared human history and the beauty of different cultures. So let's embrace this Amazing diversity.
In 79 CE, the Vesuvius volcano erupted and burned down two beautiful cities of the Roman Empire, Pompeii and Herculaneum. Many of you have probably heard about this tragic story. However, few people know that in the middle of the 18th century, archaeologists discovered ancient scrolls from that time amongst the ruins of Herculaneum. For any scientist or historian, such a discovery is a treasure trove that offers insights into the thoughts and lives of people from over 2,000 years ago. However, the problem was that 1,800 scrolls were found in very poor condition, singed by the heat of the volcano, coated in ash and soot. They had become hardened black lumps. Brittle as coal, any careless movement could destroy them. Scientists were aware that invaluable knowledge from an ancient Roman library was concealed within, and endeavored to decipher the texts. One method was to cut the scrolls in half and scrape off the thin layers of solid dust and ashes. Then, the researchers created a special machine that could slowly unroll the scrolls. They managed to read a few words, but unfortunately, such methods damaged and even destroyed some of the artifacts. In those instances, archaeologists could only wait for advancements in technology that would allow them to unfold and read the scrolls. And finally, this day has arrived. Artificial intelligence has now enabled researchers to decipher texts written 2,000 years ago, even though the inscriptions on the scrolls were charred and nearly illegible. Initially, scientists scanned the scrolls and created high-resolution digital models. This process allowed specialists to identify the areas where ancient ink had altered the texture and shape of the papyrus fibers. In the regions where ink was applied, the papyrus was slightly thicker and contained a higher level of carbon, the key component of the ink. The researchers developed a machine learning model capable of detecting these subtle details within the papyrus. They uploaded thousands of 3D images of the scrolls to the internet, inviting people to collaborate with AI in decoding the text. During the early stages, the system occasionally made errors, making human assistance essential. To incentivize participation, scientists and investors from Silicon Valley offered $1 million to anyone who could successfully decode the texts. This initiative significantly accelerated the process, resulting in the deciphering of several passages from the ancient works. Fragments of the first transcripts are like a blog about how to enjoy life. The author of the scroll, Philodemus, was a follower of the Greek philosopher Epicurus, who considered pleasure and luxury the highest goal in his life. So, Philodemus thought so too. We do not right away believe things that are scarce to be absolutely more pleasant than those which are abundant. It feels as if it was written by some modern influencer talking about a detox program or a diet. It seems that people who lived 2,000 years ago were almost the same as modern ones. Philodemus was apparently a wealthy man, because he lived in a villa that may have belonged to Julius Caesar's father-in-law. In his works, the author criticized the Stoics, who couldn't say anything about pleasure at all. Philodemus was such an ardent fan of Epicureanism that one of the scientists compared him to a guy who collected albums from only one band and nothing else. Several hundred Herculaneum scrolls remain unread. Scientists believe that they may contain works by Aristotle, Homer, Sophocles, and the Stoics. Fortunately, with modern AI technologies, the decryption process will go on much faster. But how did historians and linguists decipher ancient texts in the past centuries? It was actually a very difficult mental job. Let's say you found an ancient slab in the 19th century, somewhere in Greece. To understand what was written there, you'd have to compare it to several other deciphered plates with similar writings of that era or similar languages. Letter by letter, symbol by symbol, you'd be deciphering ancient writings for several months or even years to figure out, say, the recipe for ancient mashed potatoes. Fortunately, with the development of computer technology, those days are long gone. Now, all ancient scrolls can be scanned and uploaded to a database on a computer. You may not even have to decipher the text for a long time if the computer finds a match of characters in other ancient manuscripts. But even if you have a perfectly preserved piece of papyrus or an ancient book where all letters are visible, this doesn't mean that you and AI will be able to decipher it. One of the most famous encrypted texts is the Voynich manuscript. This work, which consists of 240 colorful pages, was acquired by Polish bookseller in 1912. He found that book intriguing because of astrological symbols, unknown plants, and unusual human figures drawn on its pages. And all this was accompanied by handwritten texts. The author had beautiful, clear handwriting, but the language of the book is still unknown. Someone wrote this art book around the beginning of the 15th century and divided it into 6 sections devoted to botany, astronomy, biology, cooking, medicine, and cosmology. Many scientists and linguists have tried to decipher the mysterious drawings with inscriptions, but no one has gotten reliable results. Even AI couldn't help this difficult task. Some believe that this book is dedicated to science, and others believe that it contains knowledge about witchcraft. Perhaps it's a mix of science and magic. According to one version, the manuscript is a medical textbook that copied information from other scientific works from the Middle Ages. Before the invention of the printing press, people copied books and rewrote them by hand without worrying about copyrights. It's possible that the author of the manuscript outlined all their knowledge about herbal medicines and the influence of astrology on health. People in the past believed that the state of the body and stars in the sky were connected. The coolest thing is that the book has been scanned. You can download it in high resolution and try to decrypt it yourself. Who knows? Maybe you will succeed and get some ancient secret knowledge. An unknown language or poor text condition may not always be a problem for linguists. Imagine that you open some copy of classical literature dated to the 19th century. You read the pages carefully, and at the end of the day, you feel slightly unwell. You read the book every day and feel worse and worse. At some point, you go to the hospital, and doctors tell you that you've been poisoned. Yeah, sometimes working with old books can be literally dangerous for your health. There are even catalogs of poisonous books in the world. They are toxic not because someone intentionally sprayed them with poison to hurt the reader, but because people wanted to make books look more colorful. Recently, 2 such books have been withdrawn from the National Library of France because of their bright green covers. The pages were ordinary, but the hardcover could have been coated with arsenic. The mass production of books took place in the 19th century. Book publishers wanted to release as many copies as possible, so they used not expensive leather covers for them, but cheaper fabric options. To make a book attractive to customers, they painted them in bright green, yellow, red, and other colors. They got the green color of the cover thanks to the bright pigment created from copper and arsenic. It was a very cheap dye, but brighter than other dyes containing copper carbonate. An arsenic dye was used not only for books, but also to create candles and wallpaper. The problem was that the dye's pigment decomposed quickly and released toxic carcinogenic fumes. Arsenic caused severe health problems. People calmly lived in their homes and couldn't understand what was happening to them. The same thing happened to many readers of that time. It was only by the end of the 19th century that people stopped selling toxic items. Now, to read a poisonous book, if you want to do it that is, you have to wear gloves and a protective mask. And after work, wash your hands thoroughly.
If you come across a well in Portugal, resist the temptation to gaze into its depths. The inverted tower in the enigmatic city of Sintra sends chills through those who encounter it as it spirals down a daunting 88 feet into the underground. It certainly wasn't designed to collect water, yet its true purpose remains a closely guarded secret. Dating back to around 1904, this well could have been involved in a mysterious initiation tradition from the Knights Templar. The Templars had faded into history almost 6 centuries before the construction of this pit, but their enigmatic traditions were revived by later generations. So one theory says that candidates seeking to join the group back then had to confront their deepest fears by facing this well, descending its spiral staircase blindfolded. When they reached the bottom of the inverted tower, they removed their blindfolds and were faced with this frightening sight. The only way out of this dark labyrinth was to keep looking up and following the light. Now imagine yourself browsing the shelves of a used bookstore until you find a book with an alphabet you've never seen before. You decide to use an image translation app but find no matches. Intrigued, you buy the book. Then you show it to your friends and family, but nobody recognizes that alphabet. Rare book dealer Winfried Voynich probably experienced the same frustration back in 1912, when he acquired what would later become the most enigmatic book in the world. The work is known today as the Voynich manuscript, and it's written entirely in an unknown language that no one has deciphered yet. The pages of this 15th century codex are filled with botanical drawings, but these aren't typical daisies or roses. In fact, they don't resemble any plant species that we know of. What makes things even stranger is the illustrations of unfamiliar constellations and women swimming in green baths. Delving deeper into the realm of mysterious texts, we set off on a journey to the Qumran Caves near the Salt Sea in the Middle East. In 1952, a team of archaeologists stumbled upon 2 scrolls made of highly oxidized copper at the site. Unrolling them was a major challenge, so they decided to cut the scrolls into 23 parts to investigate them. Imagine their surprise to see Hebrew words like gold and silver popping up. But no, it wasn't an ancient invoice. It was more like a treasure map, pointing the way to over $1 million. Unfortunately, the treasure was never found. Not for lack of trying, though. You see, the quest isn't as easy as it may appear. Some of the copper scroll's vocabulary is technical, and some geographical locations remain a mystery. There's also one last possibility. Perhaps it's all a work of fiction, like a pirate tale from the old days. People talk about Mona Lisa's almost haunting stare that seems to follow you no matter where you stand. But here's a quick question. Does she have eyebrows? You got it right if you said no, and her complete lack of eyebrows adds another layer of mystique to her gaze. The most common explanation is that beauty standards were different, and perhaps plucking the hairs above the eyes was a thing around 1503. But take a look at other Italian paintings from that time, like La Schiavona or Portrait of a Young Girl. Yep, eyebrows. So, not everyone was entirely pleased with this theory, like French inventor Pascal Cotte. He spent 3,000 hours analyzing scans of the painting to dig through all the layers of Leonardo da Vinci's masterpiece. Now he claims that the Mona Lisa once had eyebrows, but they disappeared over time due to cleanings and restorations. Some historians, however, still question his findings, which means that Mona Lisa's style, or lack of it, remains an unsolved mystery. So, you decide to travel to Rio de Janeiro, and everyone tells you that Sugarloaf Mountain is a must-see. When you spot the mountain from a distance, you realize that the stone has a cavity. But around noon, the whole view changes. The shadow in that cavity takes the shape of a bird, an ibis to be precise. A local legend links this bird shape to the ancient Egyptian deity Thoth, as if the ancient Egyptians once visited Rio de Janeiro and were somehow inspired by the natural phenomenon. But it's probably just a big coincidence. I mean, literally. The real mystery, however, lies in the waters around Sugarloaf Mountain. In the 80s, archaeologist Robert Marks got a tip from locals about a treasure hidden beneath Guanabara Bay. He dove in and found quite a few Roman amphorae. You know, those ancient vases with 2 handles? His discovery could potentially provide evidence of a Roman shipwreck that might have reached Brazil 17 centuries before the Portuguese even set foot there. However, he couldn't proceed with his research, and to this day, the idea of the Roman presence on Brazil's coast remains uncertain. The true location of Cleopatra's tomb isn't the only ancient Egyptian mystery. Many secrets are carved into the walls of ancient structures, like in the Temple of Seti I. Take a close look at this hieroglyph, and you'll notice that it resembles a modern-day helicopter. Look to the right, and you'll see an engraving that looks like a submarine. Odd, right? The most reasonable explanation for this has to do with the legacies of different rulers. When a new pharaoh came to power, they had their own hieroglyphs added over the original ones. But this is still a topic of debate, as some Egyptologists believe that these mysterious hieroglyphs may represent some kind of ancient technology. The same applies to the Dendera light. The image found in the underground passageway of the Hathor Temple is a subject of significant controversy in Egyptian history. Some researchers suggest that the inscription simply represents a rising sun, while others interpret it as evidence of some kind of modern lighting system. And it does indeed resemble Crookes' tube, one of the early experiments with electrical discharges. Although there's no concrete evidence of ancient Egyptians having modern electricity, some historians believe that this theory could help explain why many discovered tombs don't have any residues left behind from the use of oil lamps or candles. A lot has been said about the mysterious pyramids of Egypt, but many people tend to forget that other inexplicable structures had already existed even before them. Our next stop takes us to Turkey. The top of a hill known as Gockley Tape, near the city of Urfa, holds an ancient secret. It features more than 20 circular stone enclosures dated back over 11,000 years. Many of these have heavily carved stone T-shaped pillars adorned with eerie human figures with folded hands. The most accepted theory is that it's the world's first temple, likely used for rituals or social events. But the greatest mystery lies in how it was built, as this site existed before the domestication of animals or the use of metal tools. So the construction must have been very difficult, challenging our understanding of the historical timeline. Now, I hope you're not afraid of heights, because we're about to take a flight over the Nazca Lines. You've probably already heard about these massive, mysterious drawings etched into an arid region of Peru. They come in many different shapes, like a spider, a monkey, and even a Google-eyed ET that is probably just a fisher. Anyway, this story got some fresh chapters in 2022 when an additional 168 new drawings were discovered. The original ones could only be seen from the air, but these new ones are much smaller and can be observed from the ground. However, one thing they have in common is that their purpose remains totally unclear. Some might call them the largest-scale calendar in the world. Others suggest that they served as a tool for agricultural purposes. Of course, many theories have emerged in an attempt to give the Nazca Lines a meaning, but the truth is that they remain some of the most important unsolved mysteries in history.
If you ever fly over the deserts of southern Peru, you'll notice distinct white lines against the rusty red background. Look closer, and you'll see some clear shapes. Straight lines, rectangles, triangles, swirls. It seems like they're parts of huge drawings. You notice a monkey, a whale, a condor, a hummingbird, and whatnot. The lines were created more than 2,000 years ago by the people of the Nazca culture. Thanks to a dry climate and strong winds in the desert, most of the Nazca Lines are visible today. To create them, the Nazca people removed the top layer of pebbles and revealed the soil beneath the ground. The color of the soil changes from reddish-brown to yellowish-gray, so the lines always look different. It looks like the creators of the lines started with small-scale models and increased the proportions to create full-scale designs. Scientists have tried to decipher the meaning of the Nazca Lines ever since they were first discovered in the 1920s. But the first mention of the lines was actually much earlier, in the 16th century Chronicle of Peru, where they were described as trail markers in the desert. Since you can't really study the lines and their symbolism from the ground, The lines became world famous only in the 1930s with the advent of commercial planes. A decade later, American professor Paul Kosak was doing his research on the lines and noticed one interesting thing. When he looked up from the line, it was pointing directly at the setting sun. It happened one day after the winter solstice, and the scientist concluded that the lines must be the largest astronomy book in the world. German scientist Maria Reiche, who got the nickname the Lady of the Lines, supported the theory that the geoglyphs served as a calendar and had some sort of astronomical purposes. She dedicated 40 years of her life to studying the lines and swept them inch by inch. She also moved into a small house close to the lines to protect them from unwanted visitors. Then in the 1970s, American researchers called the astronomy-related theory into question. They noted that in a region like Nazca, one of the driest places on Earth with only around 20 minutes of rain per year, water is a real treasure, and the straight lines and trapezoids must have had something to do with it. They could be pointing at locations for rituals that the local people organized to obtain water and make crops more fertile. The images of animals in the Andes region are also related to water. Spiders are thought to be a sign of rain. Hummingbirds stand for fertility, and monkeys living in the Amazon symbolize an abundance of water. In more recent years, the Nazca Lines have become the research ground for archaeologists from Yamagata University. They're using high-resolution aerial photography and drones to discover and catalog geoglyphs. The team has identified a total of 358 geoglyphs so far, and 168 out of them in 2022 alone. They found images of humans, camelids, birds, orca whales, cats, and snakes, most likely created between 100 BCE and 300 CE. Some of the images are around 10 to 20 feet long, so it's no wonder no one was able to detect them before. The largest geoglyphs, by comparison, are 1,200 feet across, which is about the height of the Empire State Building. The researchers believe the Nazca Lines were used as a form of communication in the desert. The linear ones pointed the direction from valley to valley. The ones drawn on slopes seem to have been drawn along ancient pathways between settlements. The scientists now plan to find patterns in the geoglyphs depending on their distribution. They use artificial intelligence to analyze the images. The AI generates designs that are likely to be painted in the desert, and the team then checks if they're actually among the Nazca Lines. Another famous Peruvian geoglyph is a candelabra, slightly taller than the Washington Monument. You can find it on a seaside hill in the Paracas Peninsula. Researchers managed to establish the approximate age of the candelabra by analyzing the nearby artifacts. It looks like it dates back to around 200 BCE. The drawing is etched deep into the sand, and it was never meant to look like a candelabra. One theory says that the drawing was supposed to resemble the trident of an Incan deity to please it. Another popular theory is that sailors used it as a beacon for navigation. Effigy Mounds National Monument on the Mississippi River has 195 known Native American mounds. Most of them are conical in shape, and there are also several that look like birds, deer, turtles, bears, and panthers. Scientists have established that the mounds date back to around 450 BCE, and the images are somewhat younger. A study of the mounds found some copper, bone, and stone tools. The builders' descendants say that the mounds served as ceremonial sites. This story is passed down from generation to generation. Some historians believe the mounds could have been also used to mark celestial events or territories. The American Southwest and the nearby regions of Mexico have over 300 intaglios, which are giant images engraved in the ground. The most famous of them are the Blythe intaglios in California, west of the Colorado River. Blythe giants are a group of 6 figures, including that of a human being and an animal. Scientists believe the images are somewhere between 450 and 2,000 years old. According to the local Mojave tribe, there is an image of Mustamho, the creator of life. The animal figure shows a mountain lion who served as his helper. The largest figure is almost as tall as the Leaning Tower of Pisa. The creators of the intaglios had to scrape the dark rock of the desert until the lighter soil showed up. It's nearly impossible to notice them from ground level. That's why they were only discovered in the 1930s, when a pilot flying over them accidentally looked down. The best way to see the giants is still from a helicopter. Kazakhstan can boast its own Nazca Lines, a cluster of around 260 earthworks in the north of the country. The steppe geoglyphs are a variety of geometric shapes, including squares, crosses, circles, and a three-pronged design. The creators of the images used materials such as dirt, rocks, and lumber to build them out of the ground. A local economist first spotted the geoglyphs while browsing Google Earth in 2007. Archaeologists suppose that the structures go back 8,000 years, but they still don't know who built them or why. One theory says that the lines helped track the sun's movement. NASA got interested in the discovery since the lines are much older than the ones in Peru. They took photos of the steppe geoglyphs from space, trying to solve their mystery. Another fact that makes the lines so special is how huge they are. One of the largest of them has sides as long as an aircraft carrier. The only humans who could have built them must have been the nomadic Stone Age tribes, but it's unlikely that they had such advanced tools. If they did, that would mean that archaeologists need to rethink the abilities of our long-ago ancestors. Organizing such a huge amount of people to work together on a complicated project is an amazing feat. Although the white horse on a lush green hill in Oxfordshire, England, could easily pass for modern art, it's actually one of the most ancient geoglyphs. It was created between the Bronze and Iron Ages and is the oldest chalk-cut hill figure in Britain. Whoever created it had to remove the turf to reveal the chalky white part of the soil. Scientists can only guess why this piece of art was created. It could have been a fertility symbol or a way to mark territory. Aerial images prove that the horse has changed over time because of the soil. It took several centuries to reveal a larger horse-like shape that lies under what we see now.
Oh man, 5 minutes to go. The most important moment in your career is coming. You're sweating buckets in that tux, but it's too late to change now. You're at an international technology conference along with the world's most famous scientists, engineers, programmers, economists, and a whole bunch of other important people. Artificial intelligence developers have made a discovery that could change the world forever. And in 4 minutes, there will be a public demonstration of this world-changing revelation. You're here as a translator. You need to translate all the sciencey stuff into several languages. You've loved learning languages your whole life. First, it was foreign films and TV series with subtitles, books, comics. Then you started to study more seriously. Your parents took you all over the world to absorb different world cultures. And when you found out there are about 7,000 languages on our planet, you decided to spend your life learning them. Well, some of them. Prestigious universities, postgrads, living in different countries, studying the history of ancient languages. All this made you the best translator and language expert in the world. And now you're a little nervous as you have to translate the conference into 7 different languages. The event begins. Scientists start to talk about the evolution of AI. No, it's not going to take over the planet. On the contrary, it's going to make people's lives easier. You have a bad feeling about this for some reason. The main developer leaks the big news. A new language has been created for the whole world to use. The language is simple to learn. The AI translation algorithm makes it easy to remember words, grammar. Basically, there will be no more communication problems anymore. To make learning it even easier, scientists have created an app that can translate any kind of speech into the new language. Context, meaning, sarcasm, irony, it can now all be translated into UCL, Universal Common Language. The world's population will be united like never before. That's when you realize that the biggest moment of your career is also the beginning of its destruction. Who's going to need a translator if everybody speaks the same language? Oh, goody. Over the next 20 years, the planet moves to speaking the common language. Every gadget has the UCL app. The language is taught in schools and institutes. Big companies and corporations introduce mandatory language courses for their employees. AI translates thousands of books a day into UCL. In movies and TV, only actors who speak UCL get the big awards. People who just couldn't learn a foreign language before have no problem with UCL. The learning process is easy and fun. Plus, it's a requirement for literally everything. So, countries start canceling their visa programs. Borders start getting erased. All over the world, the number of conflicts is decreasing because now people can understand each other much better. Operating systems, video games, tech articles, songs, jokes, science stuff, you name it, are all created in the New World language. You can call anyone on the other side of the planet, tell them something, and listen to their interesting stories. You can go on a trip around the world and not be afraid you'll accidentally order 17 squirrels for breakfast because you mixed up one little word. Movie companies stop dubbing movies and no more subtitles. Woohoo! The world has become more open. Air ticket prices are way down, and tourism and studying and working abroad is booming. Every year, more and more people renounce their citizenship and recognize themselves as citizens of the world. Science is developing faster than ever before because scientists from all over the world can finally work together. And studying foreign languages, a thing of the past. Okay, it seems like the world's become a better place, but UCL also has a dark side. Translators and language professors lose their jobs. Language schools get closed around the planet. Those dubbing actors also lose their jobs. You and many other people are opposed to the new language. You said about trying to prove that, sooner or later, UCL will cause a catastrophe. While the whole world communicates in the new language, scientists finished their first multi-country study of the human mind. The number of neural connections, so the thoughts and biological processes in the brain, have decreased. Scientists studied hundreds of thousands of people in 3 groups: multi-language speakers, one-language speakers, and those who were born in the New World and only speak UCL. Studies show that the human brains stopped functioning as it did before. People used to try to understand foreign languages, speak them, and translate them, training their minds. Now, the parts of the brain that are responsible for this have stopped working. Even if you've never learned a foreign language, you still used to see and hear words that you didn't understand, and your brain at least tried to process the information. Now, our brains are relaxed. Some say, if there are no other languages, what difference does it make? Who cares about a relaxed brain? But that's not the end of it. The human brain has become worse at analyzing information, remembering, and finding clever ways out of difficult situations. It's hard for people to learn new knowledge. People's vocabulary ends up becoming smaller and smaller. Sometimes, people can't even say what's on their mind. The average IQ begins to dip. Learning the languages of the past is becoming almost impossible. Some are worried about the future. People may forget their history. Changes in the human brain are one thing, but forgetting our history could be really dangerous. Every language is linked to its geography and history. But most importantly, language brings cultural diversity into your daily life. For example, there are many more words to describe the cold in cold countries, more shades of green in tropical countries. You get the picture. With UCL, these little things that make cultures different just sort of vanish. Most people now like the same music, watch the same movies. People start to lose interest in everything. Imagine you saved up money for 6 months to fly to the other side of the world. You arrive there, and everyone talks and acts just like your neighbors back home. They even watch the same shows and follow the same influencers as you. From now on, you'll never be able to determine where a person grew up by their accent. People talk with the same intonation, use the same sentence structure and words. Communication becomes boring. To better express your emotions, you use gestures and body language. 2 people arguing starts to look a lot like 2 crazy people, quivering, twitching, waving. But the worst thing is that people start to lose their sense of humor. Because there's less vocabulary, there's less thought. It's getting hard to think, let alone talk. Dreams get super boring, and poetry and song lyrics all start to sound the same. Yeah, life's become much easier, but so what? We can easily understand each other, but at the same time, we've forgotten how exciting it can be to learn something new. AI keeps trying to simplify UCL, and every year it gets easier and easier. Scientists have found that, at this rate, people will communicate using only sounds in a few decades. Nobody will be able to clearly express their thoughts or explain their actions. The global understanding everyone has is soon going to change to epic misunderstanding. People will simply forget how to communicate their thoughts. You've had a rough time since you lost your job as a translator. You've spent nearly every waking moment trying to prove that languages are necessary. Fortunately, you and other translators and professors make it happen. People will never stop using UCL, but interest in learning old languages reappears. Learning an old language becomes the hot new thing. There are more language schools than ever before. There are only a few people left on the planet who still remember multiple old languages. You and other translators get rich. Learning languages is now the most popular hobby, which perfectly develops your mental abilities. If it used to be cool to have an expensive car, a stacked bank account, and a beautiful house, now the ability to speak 2 languages is considered a sign of success. Film companies are making movies, writers are writing books, artists are creating songs, all in different languages again. The world goes back to being diverse, interesting, and fun. Merci beaucoup.
The story of Pompeii is complete chaos as is, but to add a little fuel to this fire, we dug up some groundbreaking facts, and I mean that quite literally. Hear me out. What if it wasn't the scorching sea of lava that destroyed the city of Pompeii, but rather an earthquake that happened during the volcano's eruption? Rewind to over 2,000 years ago. The year is 79 BCE. It was around 1 o'clock in the afternoon when Mount Vesuvius decided to erupt. Pompeians were going on with their normal daily routines when lava started taking over. The flow of lava was so quick that most people didn't have anywhere to run. The disaster took the lives of around 2,000 people. The lava covered most of the city, which then turned everything to ashes. Pompeii was only discovered during the 16th century of our Common Era, when an architect commended a dig to divert a river. It's a very well-studied site nowadays, but something unusual recently caught the researchers' attention. Scientists were excavating a site called the House of Painters at work. They were examining a couple of skeletons when they saw something weird. The skeletons probably belonged to 2 men around the age of 50. The analysis showed these men had survived the first surge of lava in the city. But they didn't make it out due to this second unexpected part, the earthquake. The men probably took shelter at the House of Painters at work, but the walls crumbled down when the earthquake hit. The men were found in a protective posture, like they were trying to shield themselves from something that was going to fall above their heads. Plus, these skeletons were not found under the layer of volcanic ash, but on top of it, proving that they really did survive Vesuvius's sea of lava. It turns out this is not as rare as it seems. A volcanologist explained that the seismic activity during the eruption really made things worse in Pompeii. He said that this seismic chaos probably influenced the desperate choices of a lot of Pompeians in their final moments. This is not the first time the world heard of a possible earthquake in Pompeii. A guy named Pliny the Younger, who escaped the disaster and witnessed the whole thing, beat these scientists to it in his famous letters. Pliny the Younger was a lawyer and an important person back in ancient Rome. He was an eyewitness to the whole Pompeii disaster, and he wrote in one of his letters that the eruption was followed by a trembling of the earth. Researchers do agree that something never added up. Pompeii is known to have really well-preserved skeletons since the ashes kind of played an important role in preserving them. But the buildings were in horrible shape, making it hard to reconstruct the entire city as it once was. Pompeii was indeed one of a kind. It was one of the most vibrant and lively cities of the ancient Roman Empire. The city was huge. It could have been home to as many as 30,000 people in its heyday. The House of Fawn, for example, was a clear example of how rich Romans lived their lives in Pompeii. It was a huge house that even had 2 gardens inside, taking up the entire block. They looked like they were made of white marble, but it was actually painted stucco. It was clear to researchers that only aristocrats lived there. Then there was this famous forum. This is where most of the administrative part of the city life happened. It was made up of a lot of different buildings, like the Basilica, a hotspot for political and civil meetings, the Macellum, which was a market, and several temples. If we were visiting this back in the day, we'd see a bunch of men dressed in tunics. A few select ones would wear togas, those heavy white pieces of draped cloth that look like bed linen wrapped over the body. Togas were mainly used on special occasions since they were costly, hard to wash, and considered a traditional costume. Representatives running for office would use it during their campaign run so that commoners would identify them as candidates. One can't forget about the Villa of the Mysteries. Cool name, huh? It was called that way because of some mysterious frescoes found inside of it. Modern-day archaeologists still haven't figured out what the scenes painted are trying to depict. Probably some type of ritual or ceremony. By the way, a villa is simply a large suburban Roman-style house. It's not necessarily a super posh place where the rich and beautiful live. It's usually located on the outskirts of town, near the city's walls. The Villa of the Mysteries one in particular was found astoundingly well preserved in modern archaeological excavations. It even had a manufacturing area inside of it, like its own little industry. It was common for richer Romans to own big farmlands, like olive gardens, for example. So they would also build a processing station inside their villas to extract the oil and package the whole thing. The amphitheater was where some of the richer men paid to put on gladiator fights for the rest of the town. It was built around 70 BCE, and it was one of the oldest amphitheaters of the world. It was even older than the Colosseum in Rome. This huge building could fit around 20,000 spectators at once. The seating was arranged by social class, so you could easily spot who was a member of the nobility. And in case you're wondering why it was shaped like a weird egg, it's because that was the shape that allowed for an unobstructed view wherever you were in the crowd. As every other Roman city, Pompeii also had some famous baths. Since not every house had access to plumbing back in the day, most people didn't shower in their homes. That's why so many Romans would use public baths, usually at the end of the day, to clean themselves. But make no mistake, this wasn't just a place for bathing, it was a cultural hotspot. The baths were made up of many different rooms. The first one was like a locker room, where people would keep their clothes and personal belongings. This is where the upper and lower classes mingled together. Someone's class could easily be identified by their clothes and jewelry. The amount of gold and silver worn back in those days is nothing compared to what most people wear today. Usually, the rich folks would leave someone to take care of their belongings while they went and took their bath. Because yes, it could happen that stuff went missing while chilling and relaxing. The big focus on self-care nowadays was already a thing for ancient Romans. It was common that before taking a bath, olive oil was rubbed all over the skin. They would scrape off the dirty skin with a strigil. That may sound weird, but also extremely pleasing. The baths had rooms for massages. Some of them had reading rooms, and even courtyards for some healthy exercise. Oh, there was even a natatio, or swimming pool if you're not fluent in Latin. After all, it was the Romans that said, "A healthy body is a healthy mind." The bakeries! Bread was one of the main components of Pompeian diet, so much so that there were around 30 bakeries in the city. Bread was freshly made from scratch every day. In a special area of the shop, the corn or wheat was ground, and mules would circle around to keep the mills going. The funny thing about Pompeians is that they like to cover the exterior walls of buildings with paintings, much like graffiti nowadays. Their paintings, usually frescoes, used to depict what daily life was like in the city. ancient Romans were very outdoorsy people, so coloring their walls seemed like a good option for them. A lot of houses had frescoes inside of them too, to make up for the lack of windows. The paintings gave the house owners the illusion of more space if the painting was of, let's say, a garden, for example.
Now, have you ever seen cricket balls that are 3 billion years old? Klerksdorp spheres were found in deposits of the mineral pyrophyllite in South Africa and rock the science world. They do look like tiny ancient cricket balls with seams-like lines around the middle. Back in the 1980s, some folks claimed these spheres had been made by an advanced pre-flood civilization we know nothing about. One museum curator shared stories about how they rotated on their own in a display case. There was also a TV show that invited a psychic who declared the spheres were pieces of an ancient spaceship. But according to geologists, these spheres are actually pretty common concretions or spherical objects formed by different minerals than the surrounding rock. The seam-like lines are just imprints from the host rock's layers building up over time. The Klerksdorp spheres come in different shapes, from noticeably flattened spheres to distinct discs. As for that episode when one of these spheres spun on its own, the curator of the Klerksdorp Museum cleared that up too. He said that when he put one sphere on its glass shelf when a journalist came to visit, the sphere naturally rotated a bit because it's round. The area where the museum is located often experiences earth tremors from gold mining activities nearby. The oldest known human-like footprints could be 6 million years old. They were found on the Greek island of Crete in 2002. If the number is correct, it would mean that early human ancestors may have migrated between Europe and Africa much earlier than we previously thought. This doesn't mean Africa is not the cradle of humankind, though. It could just prove that early human ancestors moved back and forth between continents. Some researchers believe the footprints were left by a bipedal creature possibly related to an early human ancestor nicknamed El Greco. According to scientists who studied them, the footprints have a very human-like shape, with 5 toes and a parallel big toe. Some scientists are skeptical about it and suggest the prints might be from a late European ape. The new study analyzed fossilized marine microorganisms found in the sedimentary rocks to determine the footprint's age and prove it's actually 6 million years. The next amazing find that keeps scientists entertained is the Dorchester plot. It's a beautifully crafted metal vessel with some fancy geometric designs embossed in shiny silver. The pot was discovered in, who could have thought, Dorchester in 1852 under quite unusual circumstances. During a powerful blast, the pot broke into 2 pieces. Scientists believe it was originally embedded within a rock or boulder known as pudding stone. The rock from which the Dorchester pot emerged is dated to be around 500 million years old, so it could mean the pot itself is also that old. The current and less exciting theory suggests that the Dorchester pot is a Victorian-era candlestick holder. Such things were really trending back then, so it's not a surprise to find such fancy household item from that time. The Dorchester pot falls into the category of ooparts, or out-of-place artifacts. Those are objects that seem too advanced for the time period they're supposedly from. If we accept that the pot is 500 million years old, then whoever made it was way ahead of their times in terms of crafts and tech. One extra mystery is that the pot has an engraving of a plant that most likely disappeared from Earth over 100,000 years ago. Sounds like good proof the pot is really extra old. Now, it looks like the oldest map in Europe is a stone from 4,000 years ago. This Bronze Age slab was found in France in the year 1900 at an ancient burial ground. The carvings on the slab show in 3 dimensions the River Odey network with a fantastic accuracy of around 80% over an 18-mile stretch. There are other stone-carved maps around the world, but this one is unique because it shows a specific area to scale. Looks like the slab's carvings don't just map rivers and hills, but also settlements, barrow sites, and field systems. Archaeologists say the slab wasn't used for navigation, but rather to symbolize power. The detailed markings on the slab might have served to illustrate the domain of a local ruler, possibly a prince or king, to show their control over the territory. When the ruler lost power, the slab was likely repurposed as part of a burial vault. The unique artifact was stored in the cellar of a museum. For decades, no one even noticed until several scholars read older reports about the slab and decided to check it out. They conducted a detailed analysis using 3D techniques. Their research proved that the creators of the slab had not only etched lines into the rock, but also modified its surface to reflect the topography of the landscape with high accuracy. The Salzburg cube, also known as the wolf's egg iron, was discovered in the late 19th century in Austria. Now, don't let the name mislead you. It doesn't look like a cube at all. It's more like a rounded object with two flat sides. Down the middle, there's a groove, and the surface is covered with pits and craters. This unique appearance is the reason why many people think it might be something out of this world. Workers accidentally found this artifact when they blew apart a piece of coal. The coal seam it came from is thought to be over 60 million years old. The Salzburg cube moved between museums, mysteriously vanished in the early 20th century, and then showed up again. A professor from Bonn University suggested it might be from a meteor, but they found no evidence of elements that you'd normally see in meteorites, like cobalt or nickel. Then researchers thought it must be a human-made object, possibly a Victorian-era candlestick holder. No one knows the true story of the cube or its current location. Yep, it disappeared again. Have you heard about the Meister print? It's a fossilized sandal print discovered in 1968, and it has sparked a lot of intrigue. There's a trilobite inside the print, which supposedly went extinct around 500 million years before humans even existed. But many historians think this age is an exaggeration. When Meister found the fossil, it was authenticated. But the scientist who did it didn't confirm it was a human sandal print. He only agreed there was a trilobite there. When another scientist visited the site, he found a 6-inch impression he believed was from a child's moccasin. But the footwear seemed to be new. So, could it be evidence of time travel? Proof that humans existed millions of years earlier than we thought? Or a sign that someone else visited early Earth? Or is it just a rock formation that looks like a sandal print? We still don't have the answers. Back in June 1936, a couple was walking along Red Creek in London, Texas. London, Texas? Yeah, when they stumbled upon something unusual. It was a piece of wood sticking out of what seemed to be an ancient rock formation. About 10 years later, their curious son decided to crack open the rock to see what was inside. And he saw a hammer, which looked surprisingly modern. Then, one unique finds enthusiast decided that the rock encasing the hammer was from the Cretaceous period. This would mean that someone dropped a 19th century hammer while dinosaurs like Triceratops were still roaming the earth. So, if this hammer was truly from the Cretaceous period, then the whole evolutionary theory would be wrong. And if the hammer was modern, it would mean the Cretaceous rock formation it came from was much younger than we thought. But the real answer was much simpler. The hammer was indeed modern, and geological processes had encased it in rock. Minerals can harden around an object in a relatively short time. So the hammer was probably dropped by a miner a century or so ago, and the rock formed around it afterwards. And no, it wasn't a Victorian-era candlestick holder either. Now, you can't find living dinosaurs nowadays, which is a good thing, mostly, but you can still meet some creatures that might have gone to lunch with them. The frilled shark, for example, is a living fossil that comes from a family of sharks that have been around for about 80 million years. One of the coolest things about it is its long, eel-like body that can grow as long as 6 feet. It has 6 pairs of gills on his throat, which help the frilled shark breathe in the deep, cold ocean where there isn't much oxygen. The shark can move very quickly, like a snake, to catch its prey when it least expects it. Little frilled sharks take an exceptionally long time to grow, up to 3.5 years, which is one of the longest times for any animal with a backbone. The Chinese giant salamander is another living fossil that can tell you what was going on Earth around 170 million years ago. Now, when I say tell, I really mean it, as it can make sounds like hisses, whistles, and barks. and even a noise that sounds like a crying kid. The biggest Chinese salamander found so far weighed 130 pounds, as heavy as 2 Dalmatians, and was almost 6 feet long. Giant salamanders like to be alone. Hey, I want to be alone. And will chase away other salamanders from their space, except when it's time to start a family. During the day, they hide and sleep under rocks. They can make a special substance from their skin that keeps predators away. Now, gharials are reptiles that have been around for about 38 million years. They live in India and Nepal in slow-moving, muddy rivers. Sadly, there are very few gharials left in the wild, less than 100. These creatures can't control their body temperature, so they need to sunbathe to get warm or cool down in the water if they get too hot. Their eyes are close together and face forward, which helps them see in 3 dimensions and judge distances more accurately. Gharials also have a transparent third eyelid that protects their eyes when they're underwater. They have over 100 sharp teeth, but they can't chew their food. Instead, they use their strong jaws to grab prey and then, swallow it whole. The alligator gar is a fish that has a family history of more than 100 million years. It still has some cool features from ancient times, like being able to breathe both air and water. It also has a special spiral-shaped intestine, like a shark. The alligator gar is one of the biggest and heaviest fish in North America. Just like an alligator, it has a long body and snout, plus a row of sharp teeth. But instead of legs, the gar has fins to help it swim underwater. The tuatara isn't a lizard as you might think, and isn't a dinosaur either. This New Zealand resident is one of the most unique animals in the world. Scientists love studying tuataras because they can help us understand how today's lizards and snakes evolved. One of the coolest things about the tuatara is its third eye, called a parietal eye, on its head. It has its own lens, retina, and a nerve that connects it to the brain. Scientists think it might help the tuatara know when it's light or dark outside and absorb sunlight to make vitamin D or help them keep their body temperature exactly right. Tuataras can live an extraordinarily long time, up to 100 years. Cassowaries are the youngsters on our list, as they've been around for only 60 million years. They have some things in common with dinosaurs, like their 3-toed feet and how they breathe. Cassowaries love to eat fruit, lots and lots of fruit. This love of fruit helps the rainforest, because when cassowaries eat the fruit, their bodies don't harm the seeds inside. As they move around the forest, they spread these seeds, you can guess how, with their own natural fertilizer, helping new plants grow. Cassowaries are big birds, about 6 feet tall and weigh over 100 pounds. They have a special claw on each foot that is 5 inches long, and they can use it to kick real fast. If they feel threatened, they can charge, kick, and even jump on someone. They can also leap up to 5 feet in the air. So, the best thing to do is stay far, far away from where they live. The order Notostraca is a group of crustaceans that you may know as tadpole shrimp or shield shrimps. These animals have been around for about 360 million years. They have a wide, flat shell that covers their head, and they have a pair of eyes on top. These creatures can be found all over the world in different kinds of water, like freshwater, brackish water, and even salty pools. They can also look different depending on where they live. Notostracans aren't picky eaters and can snack on pretty much anything, from plants to small animals and other shrimps. Some of them are considered pests in places like California rice paddies because they stir up the mud, which blocks sunlight from reaching the young rice plants. Sturgeons are some of the largest fish species on the planet. They live only in the cool waters of the northern hemisphere and never travel below the equator. Even though they are huge, sturgeons don't have teeth. They eat by sucking food off the bottom of rivers, gulfs, lakes, and oceans. Scientists believe that sturgeons came from a group of fish that first appeared around 419 million years ago, long before dinosaurs even existed. Their ancestors survived a big extinction event that wiped out 90% of all species, and went on to become the largest fish in many rivers in North America and Eurasia. Sturgeons can live up to 100 years old or even older. Female sturgeons can lay up to 3 million eggs at a time, but not all of the eggs eventually turn into real fish. Our next hero, the Pacific lamprey, has successfully lived through at least 4 mass extinctions. Its ancient ancestors evolved over 450 million years ago. These creatures have cartilage instead of bones and a third eye, which is a special light-sensing organ on top of their heads. Instead of a regular jaw, they have a mouth surrounded by teeth. They latch onto prey and sup up body fluids like real underwater vampires. And although he wasn't living underwater, the story goes that King Henry I of England might have lost his life because of a lamprey. The English monarch loved this fish so much that he defied doctors' orders to stop eating its flesh. He got sick every time he'd have it, but the lack of bones and the unusual taste made the royal fall in love with it. As a result, he got some scary symptoms from eating lamprey and eventually passed away. Can you say clueless? The elephant fish, also called the Australian ghost shark, has been on Earth for around 400 million years. Even though they're related to sharks, they aren't actually sharks. Instead of bones, their bodies are made entirely of cartilage. These fish have a special shiny tissue in their eyes that can make their eyes look like they change color from yellow to green. Elephant fish can be pretty tough and will fight back if they feel threatened. They like to be alone and usually don't hang out with other fish. Horseshoe crabs also deserve the title of survival champs, as they've been around even before dinosaurs, since 450 million years ago. 4 species are still roaming the ocean from Maine all the way to Mexico. Horseshoe crabs are more like spiders than ticks than they are like real crabs. They have 9 eyes, plus extra light sensors near their tails so they can see really well. They breathe underwater using flap-like gills near their belly, and sometimes they use these gills to swim upside down. Every spring, when the tide is high, these creatures come up to the beach at night to mate and lay their eggs, and you can see hundreds of thousands of them. Can you imagine that all modern humans came from about 1,000 people? Around 800,000 to 900,000 years ago, almost all of our ancestors disappeared, leaving about 1% of the population behind. So, what the heck happened? The Earth often goes through glacial cycles, things that we call ice ages. Back in the past, they were pretty mild and happened regularly, about every 41,000 years. The ice ages happened because of the Earth's axis. Our planet is slightly tilted at an angle, which is why its axis isn't straight up. Over thousands of years, this tilt has changed a bit. This teeny tiny shift completely changes how much sunlight we receive, especially at the poles, and leads to incredibly strong cold or warm periods. About 2.6 million years ago, when early humans were settling in on Earth, the Pleistocene epoch started. That's the era we traditionally call the Ice Age, the one from the movies. Large ice sheets completely covered parts of North America, Europe, and Asia. It wasn't constant ice everywhere all the time. These glacial cycles came and went, and sometimes ice sheets melted for a while. But overall, things were still much snowier and colder compared to now. We can still see the evidence of this from back in the day. Those glaciers carved out valleys and left behind some awesome things like moraines and fjords. And since sea levels were super low, a huge part of the world was land. This allowed people and animals to travel between continents and spread everywhere. It was the time of the megafauna. You all know about it from the movies. Woolly mammoths, saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloths, and mastodons. Our ancestors had some fun times hunting all those giants. Now, humans didn't come from one lineage. It wasn't like monkeys slowly turned into humans. We also consisted of many species: Homo erectus, Neanderthals, and so on. But only one species, Homo sapiens, survived and turned into modern humans. Harsh conditions forced them to get smarter. They learned how to make tools, clothing, and shelters to survive. They became hunter-gatherers and invented fire, which turned out to be super useful during the Ice Age, you think? But they had no idea what horrible change was coming. Something disastrous happened about 800,000 to 900,000 years ago. Humans faced a drastic population crash. Only 1,280 people survived, give or take. Some 99% of early humans were wiped out, and this tiny 1% was lucky enough to become our ancestors. This almost extinction, unsurprisingly, was the climate's fault. It was the Middle Pleistocene transition. The Earth's orbit around the Sun changed its shape a bit. Carbon levels dropped. A lot of stuff was happening, and the Earth's climate was going wild, becoming incredibly cold and dry. The seas suddenly got chillier, and Africa and Eurasia experienced horrible droughts. Looking for food was almost impossible. Scientists learned this by taking the DNA of about 300,000 people from all around the world. They used a new method to help them map the history of human evolution over 1 million years and learn more about it. No wonder we can barely find any fossils from that time. There was almost no one around. What's interesting is that before that happened, most apes had 24 pairs of chromosomes. But because the population became so small, 2 sets got fused together, and we ended up with 23 pairs. This was the final straw that separated us from other apes. Chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans all have 24 pairs, but our fused one became known as the human chromosome. Like a ripple effect, this little thing influenced our brain side, helped us start walking on our twos, and even form language. It took humans about 100,000 years to recover from this catastrophe. Only after all that time, they started spreading around again. Isn't that insane how we managed to go from 1,000 to 8 billion people? In any case, the Ice Age finally ended about 11,700 years ago. The warm period, called the Holocene, began. As things got warmer, human civilizations finally began to develop. 5,000 years ago, it was ancient Egypt, then the Indus Valley civilization, ancient China, and others. And while we've been thriving for a while, there's one catch. The Middle Pleistocene transition changed the length and intensity of glacial cycles. Before the transition, sure, there was the Ice Age, but the cold was milder, and the glacial cycles were shorter. Things got covered in ice sheets about every 41,000 years. But after the transition, the glacial periods became longer and more severe. These cycles started following a new pattern. Although they happened every 100,000 years, they were super intense. Ice sheets grew large, even extending to the south. So from now on, ice ages that will continue to happen in the future will be a bit different. The next one should be at least 50,000 years from now, maybe longer. It's good for us because it'll occur later, but at the same time, the consequences will be stronger. What our ancestors went through is called a population bottleneck. That's what we call a sudden and huge reduction in the size of a population. Usually it happens because of things like earthquakes, floods or droughts, fires, and even human actions. Just a few people survive, and only they can pass their genes to future generations. And we've got plenty of such bottlenecks in history. Our modern species, Homo sapiens, originally lived in Africa. Around 60 to 80,000 years ago, a small group of them left Africa and spread across the world. It wasn't on a whim, though. They had to move somewhere because of the droughts and huge climate problems in Africa at that time. They had to go look for food and find new places to live. They traveled through the Middle East, moving into Europe and Asia, and eventually reaching Australasia and the Americas. They quickly settled across different continents and started mixing with local human-like species, like Denisovans and Neanderthals. But there was a problem. Originally, the African species were super genetically diverse, but since only a small part of them decided to move out, they carried just a bunch of these diverse genes with them. Unfortunately, this caused a bottleneck for everyone. Human-like species from other parts of the world became less genetically diverse. Since they had a smaller gene pool, they became more vulnerable to all the harmful stuff. The African population also had a drop in genetic diversity. But at least humans managed to survive. Although eventually, non-African populations really dropped, and there were no Neanderthals or Denisovans left, only us, Homo sapiens. That's why we can say that all modern humans came from Africa. Early humans sure had it rough. About 74,000 years ago, they went through yet another disaster, the Topo catastrophe. But keep in mind that all these things are just a hypothesis. It's not certain whether it actually happened. Now basically, scientists think that there might have been a supervolcanic eruption at Lake Toba in Sumatra, Indonesia. This volcano going crazy was an absolute catastrophe for Earth's climate and humans. The eruption was one of the most powerful volcanic events in the last 2 million years. It spewed out from 670 to 1,500 cubic miles of lava and volcanic stuff. Just so you know, there are about 3,100 cubic miles of water in our planet's entire atmosphere, and this eruption had almost half as much lava. This horrendous disaster led to the formation of Lake Toba, a massive caldera lake in Sumatra. It also spewed out tons of ash and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. This caused the so-called volcanic winter, which means that while it's not actually winter, the temperatures drop and the planet is freezing because all these ash clouds are blocking the sunlight from reaching the Earth. This event affected climate patterns for years to decades. This also most likely sped up the arrival of the next glacial cycle. Luckily, humans are crazy good at surviving. The global human population was reduced to a few thousand people yet again, and they still managed to overcome this.
Not so long ago, in the 1950s, the average literacy rate in the world was 35%, meaning that in a group of 10, 6 people didn't know how to read and write. However, 50 years later, the literacy rate went to 90%, leaving only 1 person in a group of 10 without reading and writing skills. The key to this lightning speed growth can be found basically in every house. Nope, it's not the internet. The internet, on the contrary, can reportedly make us dumber in no time. The key to worldwide literacy is this big pen you've definitely held in your hands at least once in your life. Fun fact, this trusty pen has been outselling iconic items like the Rubik's Cube and even the iPhone since the 1950s. Each second, 57 Bic pens are sold, while it's 590 iPhones a minute, meaning it's just around 10 devices a second. Every single day, Bic sells 14 million of their nifty pens. Despite its popularity, it's often overlooked. It hasn't become a generic term like Xerox or Kleenex. When you flick a Bic, you're actually using a lighter, not just another writing utensil. Back in the day, people used feathers and ink to write. Fountain pens were a game changer, but they were pricey and prone to leaking. Thanks to American inventor John Loud, the first ballpoint pen was born in 1888. However, it wasn't until Hungarian creator Laszlo Biro stepped in with oil-based ink that the ballpoint pen we know and love today really took off. He came up with a genius design that would smoothly pull ink onto the ball without any fancy moving parts. That pen could consistently give you a nice clean line on paper. But his pens were crazy expensive, like $190 in today's money kind of expensive. No wonder they weren't flying off the shelves. See, back then, only about a third of people could even read and write, so pens were more of a luxury item than a necessity. And even though Biro had a great design, he couldn't crack the mass market. French businessman Marcel Bic saw the potential in Biro's pen and bought the rights, leading to the birth of the iconic Bic Crystal in 1950. With precision steel balls and affordable pricing, the Bic Cristal became a must-have for writers everywhere. But even so, despite Bic pens defeating illiteracy and stuff, there's another simple invention that may have been even more significant. Surprisingly, it's the shipping container. You may not have heard of Malcolm McLean, but this guy invented a standardized steel container that could be stacked on ships, trains, and trucks. In 1937, McLean had this genius idea, but it took until 1966 for international container shipping to really take off. There were many crucial events, and the need for quick and efficient transportation of supplies skyrocketed. By the end of the 1960s, McLean had made $160 million from his container empire. This invention didn't just save money, it saved time and labor too. Before containers, everything had to be loaded and unloaded by hand. Now, thanks to McLean's invention, it's all seamless and automated. According to specialists, the impact of containers on our lives is huge. They made the world smaller and economies bigger. Thanks to them, you pay less for everyday products. Let's say you're in the US and you need something imported from Italy. Air shipping is still ridiculously expensive, so we don't even take it into consideration. Now, imagine a ship can only transport 5 containers, each of them having 20 products inside. In total, 100 products. Let's say such shipping would cost $100, which would add at least $1 to the final price of your product, depending on how greedy the distributors are. But if you can stack the containers, you can add a second and even a third row of them, which will reduce the price. You still pay for the ship. It's the same $100, but you transport 200 or even 300 products if you can stack. Now, this is an imaginary and a bit far-fetched example, but you get the drift. Why are the containers so significant? Well, those famous Bic pens that defeated illiteracy were supposed to be delivered all over the world somehow, weren't they? And it's not only about the pens. Since we live in the era of globalization, we heavily rely on fast and affordable transportation for food, clothing, and even sponges. Meet Aaron Krause, the genius behind the smiley-faced wonder that is Scrub Daddy, the kitchen sponge that went viral on TikTok. Aaron went from polishing cars with a fancy buffing pad to creating a revolutionary cleaning sponge. His parents, both doctors, weren't too thrilled when he ditched the idea of a car washing business to pursue his sponge dreams. So, one day, Aaron was cleaning cars, and he ended up damaging the outside. But instead of crying over spilled milk, he created a line of buffing and polishing pads. 3M thought it was so cool that they bought his company in August 2008. But they didn't want the sponges Aaron had made, so those were just collecting dust in his factory. 5 years later, Aaron was scrubbing his dishes with those leftover sponges. Suddenly, a light bulb went off in his head. He had $1 million idea in his hands. And just like that, Scrub Daddy Inc. was born in 2012 with some grassroots marketing. Then, on an episode of Shark Tank in October 2012, not everyone believed in his idea. But Lori Greiner swooped in and made a deal with Aaron for a 20% stake in his company for $200,000. The next day, they sold a whopping 42,000 sponges in under 7 minutes on QVC. By the way, this beats Bic records of 57 pens per second. That day, Scrub Daddies were sold at a speed of 100 sponges a second. Aaron definitely sells heaps of sponges, but in terms of quantity, it's hard to compete with humble batteries. Just in the US alone, people buy around 3 billion of them each year. By the way, they've been around for longer than you may think. The very first example of a battery, if you let me say so, was found somewhere around Mesopotamia, and scientists call it the Baghdad battery. It was a terracotta pot, about 6 inches tall with a 1.5-inch opening. Inside there was a copper cylinder holding an iron rod, all snug as a bug in a rug. The top of the rod was separated from the copper with some bitumen and stoppers, so no accidental mixing could happen there. No one knows exactly what it was for, but there are numerous ideas about its purpose. From electroplating, meaning putting a layer of one metal like gold onto the surface of another, to storing sacred manuscripts, or even pickling veggies. But the real deal started in 1749, when the legendary Benjamin Franklin started experimenting with electricity and called his set of capacitors a battery, because they worked together like a military unit. Half a century later, in 1800, Italian physicist Alessandro Volta came up with the first electrochemical battery known as the voltaic pile. This stack of copper and zinc plates would produce a steady current, although Volta thought it was an endless source of energy. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Those batteries couldn't be used to power anything. But thanks to them, we got on the road to portable power. Alessandro Volta's battery was like the hot new gadget that totally revolutionized the way scientists worked with electricity. By the mid-1800s, the first rechargeable batteries were born, and a dry cell with liquid electrolyte was invented to make batteries more practical. Nowadays, we've got rechargeable lithium-ion batteries powering everything from players and toys to smartwatches. So, why are they some of the most successful inventions of all time? Well, they're the reason we have electric motors in e-vehicles and machines. Thanks to batteries, we have lighting all around us. And can you imagine not having battery storage for our telecommunication devices? It would be a whole different world.
Can you pronounce this name of the Aztec capital city? Yes, it's quite difficult to say in English and above my pay grade. Okay. It's Tenochtitlan. And Mayan cities are hard to pronounce too. Consider Jaxchilan. They must be part of the same language, right? Well, not really. The Aztecs and the Mayas were among the most famous Mesoamerican peoples. That's present-day Central America. But they didn't speak the same language, and they weren't even the same civilization. The two nations lived in different eras. The Aztecs dominated the region from the 14th to the 16th century. Back in Europe, this was near the end of the Middle Ages. The Mayas came before the Aztecs. Historians believe they started building city-states in the 3rd century. Their peak lasted until the 10th century. Now, this doesn't mean that the Mayas and the Aztecs didn't have contact with each other. But at the time this happened, the Mayas were on a decline, so the Aztecs traded more with their descendants than with real Mayan people. The two civilizations didn't even live in the same place. The Aztecs built their cities in the north of what is today Mexico. The Mayas lived to the south of them in the Yucatan Peninsula. Yes, that's also in Mexico nowadays. But the Mayas inhabited parts of modern-day Guatemala and Belize as well, and they spoke a number of languages. There's a whole Mayan language family they spoke, not just one language. Some of those languages have survived through today. Estimates show that there are 6 million indigenous Maya people groups spread across Central America. In Guatemala, there are 21 Maya languages recognized by the authorities. Further north, in Mexico, the number of official languages is 29. For the Aztecs, the situation is much simpler. They had a single language. It still has around 1.5 million native speakers, mostly in central Mexico. That's more than any other family of indigenous languages in the region. But is there a chance a speaker of Aztec languages can understand a speaker of the Maya language? Not by a long shot. The two languages are completely unrelated. In fact, they didn't even share the same writing systems. The Mayans were more advanced because they used hieroglyphs. Yep, like the ancient Egyptians. Instead of letters that make up words, ancient civilizations used tiny pictures to symbolize an object or a concept. When the Mayas wanted to write the word jaguar, for example, they would draw a small image of the animal. In total, their writing system had more than 800 characters like this one. Way too complicated compared to the modern way we write down words. But the Aztecs were one step behind the Mayas. They used pictograms and ideograms. Simply put, these are elaborate drawings that mark an object, animal, or concept. Compared to Mayan hieroglyphs, they aren't simple symbols anyone can draw, but true masterpieces of visual art. Only highly skilled painters could draw them. I don't say write because, technically, the Aztecs didn't have a writing system. So you could say that the Mayas were more advanced when it came to language. After all, they had the only known fully developed language in the Americas before the arrival of Europeans. But in terms of culture and economy, the two societies weren't that much different. Neither of them used work animals for agriculture and transport. The main crop for both peoples? You guessed it, corn. What they called maize. Christopher Columbus was the first to transport corn back to the old continent in 1493. The Mayans also cultivated sunflower, vanilla, and cotton. The Aztecs produced chili, beans, and squashes. When it comes to meat, the Aztecs were happy to catch fish and shrimp. The Mayans penned turkey, just like we do with chicken today. The Aztec society consisted of nobles and commoners, all led by an emperor. The Mayas mostly lived in independent city kingdoms, ruled by a king and his royal household. There were no wheeled vehicles in these civilizations. Aztec merchants traveled across Mesoamerica carrying goods on their backs. Not the most comfortable mode of transportation, definitely. We shouldn't think of Aztec roads as the ones we have today. They were narrower because they saw only foot traffic. Mayas used a similar road system that also included canoes. They wouldn't travel far from the coast, though. They carved out these vessels from large tree trunks. An average Mayan canoe was 50 feet long. That's the length of a modern-day yacht. The goods these Mayas traded ranged from salt to pearls. They considered meat a luxury good, together with gold, copper, and turquoise. And can you guess the currency of Mayan merchants? Let me give you a hint. It wasn't metal and paper like it is today, but cocoa beans. They had a fixed market price, which made them the ideal payment option. The situation in modern societies is not much different. Around 2/3 of all countries have pegged their currency to the US dollar. For Mesoamericans, cocoa beans were their green banknotes. The Aztecs used the same exact currency, but with a twist. They had something called axe money. One axe was worth 8,000 cacao seeds. I bet their exchange offices were fun places to work. When it comes to minerals, jade was highly esteemed in both cultures. The Mayas and the Aztecs made tools and ornaments from it. These peoples believed jade brought beauty and long life to the person who wore it. Their jade mines were located in present-day Guatemala. And remember that city from the beginning that we could hardly pronounce? The founding of the Aztec capital gives an insight into the belief system of the whole nation. According to legend, the Aztec deity told them to build a city in the place where an eagle sits on a cactus with a snake in its talons. They saw this happen on an island in a lake. This is where they built the city. If you want to find it on the map of Central America today, look for Mexico City. That's the site of an ancient Aztec capital. It even got its name from the ancient nation, because Mexica was an alternate name for the Aztecs. They constructed the city on small artificial islands. It was slightly bigger than the surface area of London Heathrow Airport. The Mayas didn't have a capital city as we know it today. Their civilization spanned across 40 cities. These settlements had a population of 5 to 50,000 inhabitants. Today, these sites could be classified in terms of size as small American towns. But the total number of Mayan cities is not final. Archaeologists keep discovering new ones deep in the jungle of the Yucatan Peninsula. Quite recently, researchers unearthed a new site in the southeast of Mexico. They found a number of stone columns and named the city after the Mayan word for it. Back in the day, the city was part of the central Maya lowlands. Today, this region is covered with thick jungle. The Maya abandoned their settlements in this area around the 8th and the 9th century. Historians still cannot agree on why this happened. Some claim overpopulation was the main issue. Others argue the trade routes collapsed, so Mayan cities couldn't flourish anymore. Whatever the case, northern Mayan cities lived on. The descendants of these peoples were there when the Europeans stumbled upon them several centuries later. The Aztecs were also present in today's Mexico at this time, but contact with a foreign culture didn't bring them much good. There was an outbreak of smallpox that sealed the Aztecs' fate. This doesn't mean that this American nation left the world stage forever, though. Every time we say words like avocado, chili, guacamole, chocolate, and coyote, we're actually reviving the Aztec language. These words are present in pretty much every language on the planet. Mayan words also entered modern English. Linguists argue that the word shark actually comes from a Mayan language. This is the word these ancient Mesoamerican people used for fish. Both ancient civilizations left behind pyramids, and they look very similar in style. The only hint that can help you differentiate between them is that there are way more Mayan ruins that still exist today. Finally, regarding maize, or corn as we call it, there's a story among the Maya descendants that their process of harvesting corn back then was called amazing. Get it? Maize? Corn? Okay, I made that up. You're not surprised, are you?
Imagine discovering an ancient city without leaving the comfort of your home. In 1963, a man in the Nevşehir province of Turkey did exactly that. He was renovating his house. He knocked down a wall in his basement and found a mysterious room. He continued digging and saw a tunnel. This is how Derinkuyu underground city was found. Derinkuyu is one of the deepest multi-level underground settlements of Cappadocia and in all of Turkey. This engineering masterpiece has 8 levels. The inhabitants living on those floors had access to cellars, storage areas, chapels, a school, a study room, and other structures. All floors are connected by an extensive network of tunnels. It's believed that the underground city was built as a shelter. You can't see the construction from the outside. Its depth is approximately 279 feet. The complex was large enough to shelter about 20,000 people, plus their livestock and food supplies. There's also a 180-foot ventilation shaft. People used it both for ventilation and as a well. The well supplied water both to the villagers living on the surface and to those hiding in the underground city. Interestingly, those living on the bottom levels were able to cut off the water supply for the upper and ground levels. This kept the water safe from potential poisoning. The place was designed for protection. The tunnels could be blocked from the inside with huge round rolling stone doors. The passageways were extremely narrow. Potential invaders had to enter the tunnels one at a time. Seems like they thought of everything in the 7th century BCE. Archaeologists believed the Phrygians were the ones who first built the levels. After them, the structure was used and enhanced in Roman times. This was when the chapels were added. The golden time of Derinkuyu, however, was during the Byzantine era. But how did these people manage to create such tunnels? Well, the rock they carved them into wasn't usual. It was soft volcanic rock. It appeared due to a geological process that began millions of years ago. Volcanic eruptions covered the area in thick ash. It then solidified into this soft rock. When the natural forces of wind and water eroded softer parts, only hard elements remained. Fun fact, fairy chimneys are also made of intricately shaped volcanic soft rock, but they formed naturally without any human intervention. I'm still in Turkey, but this time, my destination is Çanakkale, where a myth came to life. For 3,000 years, people believed that Homer's Iliad was fiction and that Troy never existed. In 1863, everything changed. Expatriate Frank Calvert discovered ancient ruins in western Turkey. He was convinced they belonged to the ancient city of Troy. Heinrich Schliemann examined this area in 1868. That's when Troy saw sunlight again after all those centuries. Troy has complex layers. Over the years, 9 ancient cities were built on top of one another. Historians say that the area was strategically located between Europe and Asia, so it became a prosperous trade and cultural center. This strategic position made Troy attractive throughout history. After the Trojan conflict, the city was abandoned between the years 1100 to 700 BCE. Then Greek settlers rediscovered the area, and Alexander the Great ruled there. The Romans then invaded the city. Speaking of this event, the first thing you would see when visiting the site is a replica of the wooden Trojan horse from a movie shot in 2004. The next stop is Lothal. In the 1950s, Lothal and several other Harappan sites were discovered in India. These new provinces extended the boundaries of the Indus Valley civilization. Lothal was an important part of the Harappan civilization. It had vast cotton and rice fields. Plus, it had a bead-making factory. Beads were made from semi-precious stones, like agate. Many of these beads were later found in Mesopotamia, which serves as evidence that Lothal was a thriving trading port. Archaeologists believe that the city was part of an ancient trade route. Traces of agriculture? Check. Traces of trade? Check. What else? The remains of residential buildings, streets, bathing pavements, and drains. Some real city planning, and impressive examples of early urbanization. The town was well constructed. There were modern houses. Some of them had 6 rooms, bathrooms, a large courtyard, and even a veranda. Lothal also had the world's oldest known dock. It linked the city with the Sabarmati River and the trade route. The ancient Mayan city of Calakmul is located in southern Mexico in the tropical forest of the Tierras Bajas. From 500 CE to 800 CE, Calakmul was home to over 50,000 people. There was a central plaza surrounded by outer districts. And if we count both the inhabitants of all those outer areas and those who lived in the center, Calakmul had a population of more than 1.5 million people. It was a city that was habitable for 12 centuries. It's believed that the place had more constructions than any other excavated Maya settlements in the region. After 1000 CE, the Maya civilization there faced a downfall. The settlement that was once the center of Mesoamerica was almost completely abandoned. The ancient city was at the heart of the second largest tropical forest in America. The site is well preserved, so today, if you were to visit it, you would be able to picture what life looked like in ancient Mayan times. The city remains include architectural complexes and sculpted monuments, defensive systems, quarries, water management features, agricultural terraces, massive temple pyramids, and palaces, not to mention a variety of body ornaments and other accompanying objects. It proves that complex state-organized societies lived in this tropical forest. The Mayans depicted nature in their paintings, pottery, sculptures, rituals, and even food. I'm moving on to a place people thought didn't really exist. The city of Thonis Heracleion appeared only in a few inscriptions and ancient texts. Turns out, it was waiting to be discovered for thousands of years. Scientists searched the majority of the coast of Egypt. But then, archaeologist Frank Gaudio and his team detected a colossal face looking at them from under the water. The ancient city of Heracleion was discovered completely submerged 4 miles off Alexandria's coast. In the ruins of the lost city, there were 64 ships, 700 anchors, and a treasure trove of gold coins. Archaeologists consider a 16-foot tall statue and the temple remains the most important findings discovered by the expedition. Back then, the city had ceremonies and celebrations that took place in the Temple of Amun. The ruins and artifacts were made from granite and diorite, so they were in good condition even after having been in contact with water for centuries. They give people a glimpse into what life was like 2,300 years ago in one of the most important trade ports of the world. The city had a network of canals. You can think of it as an ancient Egyptian Venice. The canals linked many separate harbors and anchorages. Towers, temples, houses, and other structures were also linked by bridges. Thonis Heracleion was the country's main port for international trade and the collection of taxes. No one really knows how the city ended up submerged, but archaeologists connect it with natural causes. At the end of the 2nd century BCE, most probably after a flood, Heracleion got covered with water. Then, Alexandria, the city founded by Alexander the Great, became more glorious than Heracleion. Before Alexandria's fame, Heracleion was the main port of entry to Egypt. So, after the disaster, many ships heading for Heracleion had to change their route and go to Alexandria. Heracleion lost its glory until its rediscovery in 1933. Mesa Verde is an American national park in Colorado. The park is the largest archaeological preserve in the U.S., with more than 5,000 sites, including 600 cliff dwellings. Mesa Verde means green table in Spanish. The name comes from the shape of the mountains in the area, with flat tops and steep sides. The park is an ancestral Puebloan archaeological site. Starting from 7500 BCE, a group of nomadic Paleo-Indians seasonally lived in Mesa Verde. They were hunters, gatherers, and crop farmers. They built the first pueblos in the region. By the end of the 12th century, the Mesa Verdeans began constructing massive cliff dwellings, which are now the best-known structures in the park. You're walking down the street. You see a strange-looking antique shop called Ageless Trinkets of Mr. Bright. You're curious, so you enter there. You take a look at all the weird stuff. Suddenly, an old folded parchment paper catches your attention. It's a world map, but something's off with it. Instead of showing the countries as you know them, it shows the locations of 4 mythical lost worlds and civilizations. Mr. Bright, the shop owner, comes next to you after realizing your shock. This map won't let you find these places or anything, but I can explain to you the legends behind them if you want, he says. Let me begin with Atlantis. You might know it as Aquaman's underwater kingdom, but Atlantis, the fictional island, was actually first introduced in two of Plato's works. According to him, Atlantis was a highly advanced civilization that existed about 9,000 years before his own time, and its story had been passed down by poets, authors, and others. He wrote about Atlantis and its citizens to give a moral lesson and to teach about the dangers of arrogance, as well as the eventual downfall of those who are after too much power. In his dialogues, Plato stated that Atlantis was a great and powerful empire that was respected in all parts of the world. It was founded by beings who were half deities and half human, and became a great naval power after a while. Being an island filled with gold, silver, and other precious metals certainly helped their case. But besides that, it was also known for its breathtaking architecture and state-of-the-art technology, as well as its countless rare and exotic wild animals. Atlanteans were proud of their great achievements and the perfection of their civilization, but their excessive pride was going to bring their downfall. They believed they were so superior that they could gain control over any nation. This led them to launch a series of invasions. They conquered many of the Mediterranean lands, but when it was time to enter Athens, Athenians pushed back with an extraordinary force, so the Atlanteans were finally defeated. Plato stated that deities then got angry at Atlanteans because of how wicked, greedy, and immoral they became. So they punished them by sending earthquakes, which caused Atlantis to sink beneath the sea. Although the earliest written records of Atlantis were Plato's works, some people still believed his story to be based on truth and tried to identify the island of Atlantis with actual countries. Some people suggested it may have been located in the Mediterranean Sea, near the coast of Spain or Italy. Others thought it may have been located in the Caribbean, off the coast of Central or South America, but there was no solid evidence to support any of these claims. One theory, in particular, seemed more plausible than the others, though. Located in the Aegean Sea, the island of Santorini was the home of a highly advanced Minoan society. However, due to a huge volcanic eruption, it was destroyed about 3,600 years ago, causing the Minoan civilization to suddenly disappear. These similarities between the fictional Atlanteans and the historical Minoans made Santorini a good candidate for the speculations. Yet again, there were still major flaws with it, such as how the time when Plato said Atlantis was destroyed doesn't coincide with the time of Santorini's eruption. So Atlantis still continues to be regarded as nothing more than a popular legend in the scientific world. Now, let's move toward the northeast direction on the map, Mr. Bright says. According to Celtic Breton mythology, there once was a magnificent city called Ys, also known as Caris, that towered over Douarnenez Bay in France's Brittany region. It was the most wealthy city in the entire Atlantic. It was especially famous for its beautiful gardens and buildings, and its citizens were all living comfortably and happily there. Dahut, who was King Bradlon's daughter in Breton legends and literature, had a deep love for the sea. She begged her father to build a city at the edge of the sea, and that is how the city of Ys was established. Little did she know that she would be the one responsible for the destruction of her father's beloved gift. You see, since the city was surrounded by the sea, it needed to be protected by a dike equipped with floodgates, and these gates could only be opened at low tide. And the only one who had the keys to these gates was the king himself. One day, a handsome red knight arrived at the city, but couldn't pass the gates. Dahut was so taken by him that she wanted to let him in. She knew that her father was the keeper of the only key to the city, so she sneaked into his room and stole it from him. Then she gave it to the Red Knight so that he could enter the city and they could be together. However, The Red Knight turned out to be the Prince of Darkness, and he intentionally left the gate open to the raging sea. The waves soon swallowed all of Ys. King Gradlon was able to escape on his magical horse, but Dahut couldn't. She turned into an evil mermaid who lured sailors into the sea. Today, if you go to Quimper, a city in Brittany, northwest France, you can find the statue of King Gradlon riding on his horse. Although the city of Ys is a legend, Brittany coast locals believe that on the days when the waters are calm, you can still hear the tolls of the city bells deep under the sea, if you listen carefully. Mr. Bright then points at the Indian Ocean on the map and says, "Now, have you heard about Lemuria?" Back in the mid-1800s, a few scientists suggested that there was once a continent that existed in the Indian Ocean, somewhere close to the south of modern-day Sri Lanka. The first one to popularize this theory was the British lawyer and zoologist Philip Lutley Sclater. In his paper, The Mammals of Madagascar, he stated that he found lemur fossils in India, and not in Africa. However, this discovery was extremely shocking to him because of the fact that lemurs' original homeland, Madagascar, is much closer to Africa. He proposed that this was possible only if some larger continent connected the two once. He stated that this continent must have eventually sunk to the ocean floor. He then named it Lemuria, and hence the theory was born. People who came after Sclater took his theory a step further and thought that Lemuria was also the home of an extinct race of humans called Lemurians, who had 4 arms and enormous bodies, and were also the ancestors of modern-day humans, as well as lemurs. Of course, as new scientific discoveries were made on plate tectonics, evolution, and the study of DNA, the theories regarding the fictional continent called Lemuria were debunked. The last fictional land on the map is Agartha, Mr. Bright says. Taking its roots from Eastern mysticism, one legend says there's a kingdom called Agartha that is located deep beneath the surface of the earth. It's where all 4 corners of the world are connected by paths and tunnels. It is said that there's a secret entrance into Agartha hidden in the Gobi Desert, and it's built by Agarthans themselves using advanced technology that can't be detected by us, the surface folks. According to some beliefs, Agartha exists to counterbalance the energies of those who live above the surface. While we live in a state of rush and heightened emotions, this world beneath us is the total opposite. Some even say that those who escaped Atlantis fled here to continue their lives inside the Earth's core. And yet, others think it's actually a land that's crawling with all kinds of monsters. But there's no need to be scared, since modern science proved Earth's core is not actually hollow and is a solid hot iron ball. So you can cancel your journey plans to the center of the Earth if you've made any. Thanks, Mr. Bright.
To energize this amazing venue, which comes with a hefty price tag of around $2.3 billion, you'll need 28 megawatts of power, enough to supply electricity to about 21,000 homes. It was originally projected to cost just $1.2 billion, but challenges arose and the budget ballooned. I'm talking about the Sphere in Las Vegas. This place is so massive, it could fit the entire Statue of Liberty from its base to its torch. Standing at 366 feet tall and stretching 516 feet wide at its largest point, it can accommodate up to 20,000 people if they're all standing. If you want to sit down, the capacity drops to 18,600. Still, that's enough room for the entire population of some small nations, like Palau. Now, let's dive into its construction. To kick things off, you need land, and the sands provided the site. They dug out 110,000 cubic yards of dirt and rock to get things rolling. Just to put that into perspective, a cubic yard of loose, dry topsoil weighs around 2,100 pounds. If it's wet, that weight can shoot up to about 3,000 pounds. In total, they excavated the weight equivalent of 3,500 adult male megalodons. If we're talking dry soil, of course. The external sphere is 30% taller than the inner dome. Building the dome's roof took 3,000 tons of steel, which included 32 hefty trusses, each weighing 100 tons. Altogether, the dome weighs around 13,000 tons and covers a surface area of 220,000 square feet. When the construction team reached the halfway mark with the dome trusses, they had to shift the crane to the southern end of the site to finish the remaining trusses. That move alone took 2 days. It's no surprise considering the crane used is the 4th largest crawler crane in the world. Transporting it from Belgium was hard. First, it was shipped to California. Then, 120 tractor-trailers took it to Las Vegas. Another 18 days were needed to set it up using a secondary crane. The Gateway Arch is an impressive 630-foot monument situated in St. Louis, Missouri, with a base that matches its height. It's just as wide as it is tall. Made of stainless steel, this cool curved arch is not only the tallest of its kind, but also the tallest building in Missouri. Some say it's even the tallest human-made structure in the Western Hemisphere. It was built to celebrate the westward expansion of the U.S. and is officially dedicated to the American people. You'll find it in Gateway Arch National Park, which, fun fact, is actually the smallest national park in the U.S. It doesn't even feature a natural area. The arch was designed by a Finnish-American architect who won the design competition for design concept in the 40s. However, it took some time for construction to begin. The whole building process started in 1963 and was wrapped up in 1965. It cost the U.S. Treasury around $13 million. You may say, hey, it's nothing compared to the sphere you mentioned previously. Yeah, but back in the 60s, $13 million could buy you what $96 million can buy you today. But still, the arch is way cheaper than the sphere. The construction bidding was pushed from the 20th December 1961 to the 22nd of January 1962, with around 50 companies interested, and the winning bid signed on the 14th of March 1962, backed by a $2.5 million city subsidy. McDonald, not McDonald's Construction, the company in charge of the project, built a cool 30-foot viewing tower for crowds to check out their epic project. In 1963, about 1 million people showed up to take a look at the project in progress. Initially scheduled for completion in 1964, the arch was only revealed to the public in 1967. Stan Wolf, the project manager at McDonald Construction Company, mentioned that constructing a 62-story building is simpler than building an arch. He explained that with a building, it's all about stacking things straight up. With an arch, you're dealing with a lot of curves. Now, this building has set a bunch of world records. The tallest existing structure, the tallest building ever, the building with the most floors. This iconic tower is the centerpiece of a massive mixed-use development featuring 30,000 homes, 9 hotels, 7.4 acres of park, 19 residential skyscrapers, the vast Dubai Mall, and an artificial lake, essentially a mini-city. Designed to attract global attention and investment, the Sheikh aimed for the extraordinary. Ever felt a chill in the air while flying? At the top of the Burj Khalifa, it might feel a bit like you're on a plane, with temperatures about 11 degrees cooler than at ground level. The building's spire, made of over 4,000 tons of steel, stands at 660 feet tall, although it's mainly for looks, as the building would still be an impressive 1,919 feet without it. The exterior consists of reflective glass panels and aluminum, designed to handle the fierce desert sun and wind while providing great thermal performance. Those glass panels are no joke. Each weighs about 800 pounds. The building is equipped with 57 elevators, including the world's fastest double-deck variety, zipping passengers up and down at speeds of up to 33 feet per second. But if you're up to some cardio, there are 2,909 stairs leading to the 160th floor. No thanks, after you. Given how tall the Burj Khalifa is, You may mistakenly think water might be an issue. I mean, it's obviously hard to pump it up there, but it's not. Burj Khalifa's system delivers around 250,000 gallons of water daily through many miles of pipes. The temperature regulation isn't a problem either, as the air conditioning system is so powerful that its effect is comparable to melting 13,000 tons of ice in a day. Right. And what about cleaning those windows? There's a 36-worker crew to take care of all 24,348 windows. Want to guess how much time it takes? Not a week, not a fortnight, not even a month. It takes around 3 months. And this task is performed 4 times a year. 3 by 4 gives us 12, so yeah, it's pretty much a non-stop process. Elizabeth Tower is one of the greatest and most iconic constructions of all time. Don't tell me it's the first time you've heard about it. It's just another name for Big Ben. One of the main secrets of this tower is its foundation, which is crucial to its stability. The tower's base is square, and it measures 40 feet on each side. For such a tremendous construction, a stable foundation is crucial, so Big Ben's construction foundation is 12 feet thick. Still, it's not the foundation it's famous for, but the clock. How do we care for something this high up? For the past 150 years, reaching the top of the clock tower has meant tackling a spiral staircase with precisely 334 steps. There is a spiral staircase with 290 stone steps up to the clock room, followed by 44 to reach the belfry, which gives us those 334 steps I mentioned before, and an additional 59 to the top of the spire. They're currently adding elevator shafts, but don't get too excited. They're mainly for maintenance and security and won't be for regular use. So once you reach the top, there's a door that opens to a narrow walkway behind each of the 4 clock faces. It's a tight fit, just spacious enough for an average person. If you venture a bit further on the stairs, you'll find another door leading to the clock room, which holds the impressive clock mechanism. Now, the clock mechanism is an engineering wonder all on its own, featuring a clever system of weights, gears, and a pendulum that keeps time. The pendulum, measuring 14 feet, plays a vital role in ensuring the clock's precision. As they say, England swings like the pendulum do.
If everything had gone according to the original plan, you wouldn't recognize the Washington Monument today. The designer, Robert Mills, wanted to create a temple-like building with 30 tall stone columns and statues of important people from American history. There would have also been a statue of George Washington riding a horse and a 600-foot-tall Egyptian-style obelisk in the middle. In 1848, they placed the first stone of the monument in a big ceremony with thousands of people. Abraham Lincoln also was there, although he was not yet famous. They started building, but by 1854, they ran out of money when the monument was only 150 feet tall. Finally, 22 years later, President Ulysses Grant gave the project federal money to finish the monument. By then, tastes had changed, and they decided not to build the temple part of the base. Since the project had stopped for so long, the stone colors couldn't match perfectly. That's why the bottom of the monument is lighter than the top. When it was finished, the Washington Monument was the tallest structure in the world. But 5 years later, the Eiffel Tower was built, and the monument had to give away the champion's title. Years before the JFK airport started functioning, the Empire State Building was supposed to serve as one. Yep, the iconic New York's landmark antenna wasn't designed for King Kong to climb it, but as a mooring mast for giant airships. The leader of a group of investors erecting the building, Alfred E. Smith, imagined that passengers would walk down a ramp and be out on the streets of New York just 7 minutes later. But the man in charge of a famous airship called the Graf Zeppelin didn't think this idea would work out. He said that landing a dirigible was very difficult and needed lots of workers on the ground to help, plus long ropes to tie the airship down. A dirigible tried to dock at the Empire State Building only once in history, in September 1931. The pilot had to carefully steer the airship around the top of the building for 3 minutes. The winds were really strong, blowing at 40 miles per hour, which made it really tricky. Traffic in the streets below stopped for over half an hour as people watched the airship trying to land. Mount Fuji has become one of the symbols of Japan as a mountain peak, but it's actually formed by 3 different peaks. There's a legend that says Mount Fuji was created in one night by an earthquake in 286 before the Common Era, but geologists believe it's much older. The first of the peaks began developing about 700,000 years ago. 2 old mountains are part of Fuji's foundation. About 100,000 years ago, a new part grew on top of these. The volcano we see today started forming 11 to 8,000 years ago. Compared to other volcanoes, it is still considered pretty young and active, although the last time it erupted was over 300 years ago. Whenever there's a serious earthquake in the area, there's a risk it will erupt again. Thousands of people still climb it every year. You could technically live inside the Eiffel Tower if you really wanted to. Gustav Eiffel designed the tower to feature a private apartment for himself right at the top of the construction. He left the place all neat and tidy with warm wallpaper, soft chintzes, wooden cabinets, and even a grand piano. These days, the only tenants of the apartment are 2 mannequins, that of Eiffel himself and of Thomas Edison. The famous inventor was a frequent guest in the apartment. If you buy a ticket to the top of the tower, you can get a sneak peek of the apartment through a window as a bonus. The Statue of Liberty also has a hidden room. It's in the torch. This part of the statue is 29 feet long and is made of copper. It sits on a steel framework that was designed by Gustav Eiffel. Yes, the same person who created the Eiffel Tower. Unfortunately, you can't visit the torch as a tourist ever since it was completely closed back in 1916. But they placed a camera there in 2011 to allow people to enjoy live streaming of the panoramic view from the torch. If you ever pass through Trafalgar Square, you'll surely miss London's smallest police station, since it's hidden beneath a lamppost inside an ornamental light fitting. The reason why it was placed there back in the 1920s was to let police officers be close to public rallies. They happened quite a lot in that area. Some even said it used to have a direct phone line to Scotland Yard. It's now used as a cleaning station, so there isn't much to see there, apart from some mops. It took 14 years to finish the huge profiles of 4 American presidents: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and Theodore Roosevelt into the southeastern face of Mount Rushmore. If current records are true, there's an incomplete secret room behind Abraham Lincoln's head. It was meant to become the Hall of Records open for visitors. It would keep important artifacts and documents of American history, like the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. A year into the construction, the authorities decided it was more important to finish the president's profiles, so they cut funding for the project. So the secret room was never finished, and visitors to Mount Rushmore can't see it. The Passetto di Borgio is a special hidden walkway that connects the Vatican City to a nearby fortress called Castel Sant'Angelo. It's around half a mile long and was built in the 13th century. It was used by popes to escape from the Vatican when they were in danger, and it was used this way at least twice in history. A statue of Leonardo da Vinci, located at Rome's Fiumicino Leonardo da Vinci Airport, was first unveiled back in 1960. During a recent renovation, one of the workers made a mysterious discovery during this process. He found a small hole somewhere in the middle of the statue, at a height of about 30 feet. After it was carefully opened, they found 2 parchments inside. The first document, written in classical Latin, told the history of the area that now houses the airport. The other one had a list of people who attended the inauguration of the statue. There's a huge network of catacombs under Paris, stretching for around 174 miles. It's one of the largest grave sites in the world, and brave tourists are allowed to visit only a small section of it. But some people manage to get into the restricted passages to throw picnics and parties, and even start businesses there. Businesses like a fully functioning movie theater with an underground restaurant and bar. The law enforcement officers who found it believe it must have been built by some secret society. Whoever arranged it was trying to hide the entrance, making it look like a construction site. A motion sensor would set off a video camera, recording anyone who tried to sneak in. Then, a sound of a barking dog would play, hoping to scare off intruders. Those who weren't scared away would get into an underground theater with rows of seats carved into the rock, a big movie screen, and a projector just like in a regular movie theater. The experts were surprised that the electricity worked so well underground to power it all, so a team came back to check it out. But when they returned, everything had been removed. The electricity lines were cut, and the items were gone. All that was left was a note saying, "Do not try to find us."
Now, let's assume that another species, whether humanoid or dolphin-like, could have existed millions of years ago. How do we find their traces? There was a Doctor Who episode about a non-human industrial civilization on Earth that existed long before us. These reptiles, called Silurians, were forced deep underground by a catastrophic rise of temperatures on Earth, and there they thrived for centuries. That inspired scientists to create the so-called Silurian hypothesis. If there was an advanced civilization before us, we should find their traces somewhere. Well, let's try. Climatologist Gavin Schmidt and astrophysicist Adam Frank decided to dive into this themselves. Like us, any technologically advanced civilization would be hungry for energy. So they looked for global effects that would leave a widespread mark. For example, hints of large-scale industrial processes, like plants and factories, and their leftovers. Then comes the question of how long these civilizations would last. If they existed for a long time, we should look for long-lasting signs, like residues from burning fossil fuels, mass extinctions, synthetic chemicals not found in nature, and even traces of nuclear fission. Basically, we should search for the same kinds of things that humans are currently leaving behind as evidence of our activities. Unfortunately, this evidence isn't that easy to find. Let's imagine an unsettling scenario if humanity suddenly disappeared. Even though it seems like we've left a lot of changes on our planet, the future civilization millions of years from now would struggle to find any remnants of our existence. Why? Well, our planet has existed for 4.5 billion years. Complex life on Earth has existed for more than 400 million years. Compared to that, our industrial period only lasted around 300 years, and we haven't left any significant traces. Our record of Earth's history is full of gaps, especially the further back you look. The fossil record captures only some things, being very selective and incomplete. On average, one fossil emerges every 10,000 years, and dinosaur footprints are even rarer. Mountains rise, oceans change, and plate tectonics can easily wipe out evidence of entire civilizations. After a couple of million years, chances are any physical signs of a civilization would disappear. In order to find at least something, we have to look for things like odd sediment patterns or unusual isotopic ratios. Also, fossils mostly form in water, leaving us in the dark about creatures on land or in the jungles. So even if there was a technologically advanced society millions of years in the past, and even if they were far more advanced than us, we might struggle to find any clues of its existence. Frank and Schmidt try to understand how we could ever hope to spot signs of them. Discovering actual cities would be the ultimate proof of a Silurian-style civilization on Earth. But Adam Frank isn't too optimistic. Even now, our cities cover less than 3% at the surface, making it easy to miss ancient city ruins. Whether a city survives over tens of millions of years depends on whether the land around it is sinking, getting locked into a rock, or rising, getting worn away by rain and wind. So places like the French Quarter in New Orleans might have a better shot of making it into the geologic record than, say, Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco. When it comes to finding artifacts, the odds are pretty slim as well. No prehistoric iPhone would survive millions of years, fancy glass or not. Finding their fossilized remnants might be a bit more promising, but it's still tricky. Considering modern humans have only been around for about 100,000 years, it's quite possible that we might overlook any traces of an earlier advanced species. There is one thing, though. We could stumble upon their traces in rocks. Our current chaotic era might leave a distinct mark on the Earth's geological history, especially since we're basically experiencing PTM 2.0. I'll get to that in a moment. So they try to look at the changes in the carbon cycle. Humans have been releasing a lot of fossil carbon since the 18th century. This leaves a special mark in the carbon isotope ratio, like a signature that shows the difference between carbon in living things, such as seashells, and carbon in lifeless volcanic rock. Scientists also look for signs in the way sediments are arranged. Large coastal deltas might mean that there were bigger rivers made by folks in this hypothetical civilization. Traces of nitrogen could suggest big-scale farming, where they used a lot of fertilizer. Spikes in metal levels in the sediment could mean runoff from heavy industries. Of course, a single find like that wouldn't tell us anything. Schmidt says the key is to look for multiple signs together. Without clear artifacts, the uniqueness of an event might show in various clues rather than a set of changes linked to a single cause. On a quest for Silurian-style clues, scientists even decided to check the moon. Some astronomers find it surprising that no one has looked into this before. They even joked about the possibility of dinosaurs building rockets and leaving traces on the moon or other celestial bodies. These astronomers think that Earth-like planets tend to erase signs of civilizations on their surfaces. So they're exploring the wild notion that these beings might have been space travelers. In that case, remnants of their technology, known as technosignatures, could be lurking not only on our moon but also on asteroids, or even buried on Mars. There they might endure for millions or even billions of years. Unfortunately, so far, despite digging into the past 380 million years and examining all suspicious events, the researchers haven't found a clear match for a technological civilization. They don't give up, though. Frank calls for more investigation. For example, we could study how modern industrial chemicals stick around in ocean sediments. This, he believes, could help us identify similar chemical traces in the Earth's history. If there are no traces, why do we even bother to find something like that? This research is based on Schmidt and Frank's recent papers. They were delving into the Anthropocene. It's the proposed epoch, dominated by human activities on Earth. It's full of these things called hyperthermals. They're prehistoric events when temperatures on Earth sharply increased over a relatively short time. They're like extreme heat waves from the past. A great example of this is the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, or PETM for short. It happened around 55.5 million years ago and saw a rapid rise in global temperatures. Over 200,000 years, the average temperature on Earth jumped from about 9 to 14 degrees Fahrenheit. We studied these hyperthermals to understand how they occurred, from natural causes or human activities. So, these hyperthermals sparked the genesis of Frank and Schmidt's research. To study them, scientists started examining chemical signals and tracers left in rocks. When doing that, Schmidt and Frank uncovered some eerie parallels between all the climate issues we have today and past periods of rapid temperature shifts. There's a close similarity between the PETM and other hyperthermal events. So all this work isn't just about solving a historical mystery. Understanding our impact on the environment can guide us to finding better ways to live in harmony with the planet and avoid becoming a forgotten species in the future. Our Milky Way is filled with lots of planets that could be just right for life, but we don't know if there are other civilizations out there. Earth is the only place we know of with living beings. About 200 years ago, people wondered if there might be civilizations on Mars. Back then, it was a real question, but once we got pictures from space probes, we decided there wasn't any evidence for it, and that idea got stuck in our minds. Now, it's not even considered a valid topic for serious science. It's seen as kind of silly. But no one has set clear limits on what could have happened on our own planet a really long time ago. So, even if there is no proof, we shouldn't throw away the possibility. Don't forget, it took humanity a while to recognize dinosaurs. Maybe Silurian